بأن تكف فورا عن إمدادها بالعتاد العسكري المتطور والمسيرات الاستراتيجية التي تقصف الآن المرافق المدنية في مدينة الأبيض وغيرها من المدن، والإسراع بإعلان تصنيف هذه الميليشيا كجماعة إرهابية بعد أن استوفت كافة معايير التصنيف وفقا لتعريف الإرهاب والأعمال الإرهابية. سيد الرئيس، نؤكد انفتاح حكومة بلادي واستعدادها للانخراط الإيجابي مع المبادرات الصادقة الرامية لوقف هذه الحرب بالوكالة، كما سماها المفوض السامي في هذا المجلس، متى ما كانت تلك المبادرات متسقة مع خارطة الطريق التي أودعها فخامة رئيس مجلس السيادة الانتقالي لدى الأمم المتحدة في 10 مارس 2025، والتي تم تعضيدها بمبادرة حكومة الأمل للسلام التي أودعها أيضا دولة رئيس الوزراء لدى مجلس الأمن بتاريخ 22 ديسمبر 2025، والقائمة على تفكيك الميليشيا وجمع سلاحها وتجميعها في مناطق يتفق عليها، ثم الدخول في ترتيبات أمنية بما في ذلك وقف إطلاق النار وعملية سياسية سودانية وبملكية وطنية، مع الترحيب اللامحدود بأي جهود للدعم والإسناد من جانب الأمم المتحدة والشركاء الدوليين والإقليميين. سيد الرئيس، إن تعاون حكومة السودان مع آليات الأمم المتحدة بما في ذلك المكتب القطري لحقوق الإنسان بالبلاد والذي تم إرساله بطلب منا، وكذلك الخبير المعين، حيث أن حماية حقوق الإنسان بالنسبة لنا هي أولوية وطنية قصوى وليست مجرد استجابة لمطلوبات خارجية، كما أن أجهزة الدولة وآلياتها ذات الصلة بتحقيق العدالة وإنصاف الضحايا ومنع الإفلات من العقاب تعمل بنزاهة وكفاءة، والسودان مشهود له بذلك. أما على المحور الإنساني فإننا إذ نتقدم بالشكر للدول التي استضافت اللاجئين، فإننا نشير أيضا إلى الجهود المقدرة التي تبذلها الحكومة رغم محدودية الموارد من أجل تهيئة الأوضاع للعودة الطوعية، والتي بلغت معدلاتها 4.3 مليون من النازحين واللاجئين حسب آخر تقارير المنظمة الدولية للهجرة عليه. فإن التزام الدولة ثابت في تقديم كل ما هو ممكن من أجل تسهيل وتسريع إيصال المساعدات الإنسانية. وشكرا لكم سيد الرئيس. وللعلم فإنني من مدينة الأبيض، هذه المدينة الجريحة لن تسقط أبدا طالما كنا أحياء. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Thank you. We will now begin the list of members of the Council, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of a group of countries.
I have the honor to speak on behalf of the EU. Albania, Liechtenstein, North Macedonia, Moldova and Montenegro align themselves with this statement. We meet at a moment for prevention. The patterns of atrocity documented by the fact-finding mission in its report, Hallmarks of Genocide in al-Fashir, must not be repeated in al-Obeid. The EU urges the RSF to halt their assault on al-Obeid immediately and all parties to cease hostilities and to respect their obligations under international humanitarian law. The primary responsibility for this war and for ending it lies with the leadership of both the SAF and the RSF and their affiliated militias, and with those who arm, finance and enable them. All external actors supplying weapons or other support must cease immediately, in line with the Berlin Principles for Sudan. Together with our quintet partners, the EU is working to advance an immediate ceasefire. At the Sudan conference in Berlin, the EU and its member states pledged over 800 million euros. Through the EU Special Representative for the Horn of Africa, we are pursuing concrete work on the protection of critical infrastructure. We have reached agreement to expand our sanctions to those who profit from this war. We will continue to support the FFM and the ICC because we must end impunity. States with influence have the duty to exercise it now. The full statement can be found online. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative for Finland on behalf of a group of countries.
Mr. President, Mr. High Commissioner, the Nordic Baltic countries are deeply concerned by the risk of large-scale atrocities in al-Obeid. Intensified RSF drone attacks and SAF counter-operations are killing civilians and putting up to 500,000 people at risk in and around al-Obeid. RSF encirclement is restricting movement and disrupting essential services, humanitarian operations and life-saving assistance. Safe, rapid and unhindered humanitarian access must be ensured. Civilians must be allowed to leave areas of danger voluntarily and without obstruction. Previous patterns of conduct by RSF, as reported by the UN, give serious cause for concern, including ethnically targeted violence, executions and other atrocities against civilians, including children, with rape being used as a method of warfare. The leadership of the SAF and the leadership of RSF, their affiliated militias and external actors supplying them with arms, bear the responsibility of this war. This war must end. External support that intensifies and prolongs the conflict must stop, and all actors with influence must act to prevent further atrocities. The only viable path forward is a durable ceasefire and an inclusive Sudanese-led and owned political process. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland on behalf of a group of countries.
President, thank you. President, this statement is made on behalf of the Coalition for Atrocity Prevention and Justice for Sudan. The conflict in Sudan continues to devastate the country, resulting in widespread civilian harm, mass displacement and constraints on humanitarian access and press freedom. In al-Obeid, intensifying drone strikes have killed civilians and damaged critical infrastructure, driving acute shortages. With the start of the rainy season, needs are increasing, while humanitarian personnel face unacceptable attacks. The risk of large-scale atrocities is rising, with 500,000 civilians in grave danger. President, we must act with urgency to address the escalating risk of serious human rights violations and abuses in and around al-Obeid. Today's debate and accompanying resolution send the strongest possible signal that the world is watching. We reiterate our support to the vital work of the UN Independent International Fact-Finding Mission for Sudan. We urge the Rapid Support Forces to end the siege-like conditions in al-Obeid. All parties to the conflict should immediately de-escalate, facilitate safe passage for civilians and guarantee rapid, safe and unhindered humanitarian access. We call on all states to refrain from harmful external interference, use their influence to call for the protection of civilians, humanitarian personnel and the prevention of further atrocities, and to support a Sudanese-led path to peace. Thank you, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya on behalf of the African Group.
Thank you, Mr. President. The African Group has been closely monitoring the ongoing development in Sudan, including al-Obeid, North Kordofan in the Republic of Sudan. We express our strong and unwavering solidarity with the civilian in al-Obeid and the people of Sudan at this difficult time. We are of the view that immediate and utmost priority is to silence the guns and achieve ceasefire, paving the way to humanitarian relief and peace negotiation and political dialogue. We strongly condemn any external interference in Sudan, which is fueling the Sudanese conflict in flagrant violation of all relevant African Union PSCs, communiques and UNHRC resolution. The group emphasizes its continued commitment to respect the sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence and political unity of Sudan. We recall the importance of the principles of complementarity and the African solution to African problems. The group welcomes the regional mediation efforts and initiative to solve the crisis in Sudan. We also welcome all supporting efforts to the negotiation by the regional international actors. We reaffirm the need for a single coordinated international effort to resolve the crisis in Sudan under the auspices of the AU together with IGAD, with the support of the UN, League of Arab Emirates and key international partners, and based on the AU roadmap for the resolution of Sudan crisis. In this regard, the group refers to the welcoming of the AU and the IGAD to the peace initiative presented by the government of Sudan at the United Nations Security Council on December 22, 2025. We urge parties to implement the Jeddah Agreement to ensure protection of civilian and humanitarian aid delivery in Sudan. We urge the international community to provide all necessary support to Sudan. The group appreciates the cooperation of government of Sudan with the OHCHR and the UN designated experts and urge it to continue that cooperation. We urge OHCHR to continue its technical assistance to Sudan. We believe that states have the primary responsibility for the promotion and protection of human rights. The consent of the concerned country remains a crucial element for the process of the implementation of the mandates of any mechanism established by HRC or expansion of the mandate of the existing mechanism. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. تعرف دولة الكويت عن بالغ قلقها إزاء التطورات الميدانية والإنسانية في مدينة الأبيض وما حولها بجمهورية السودان الشقيق، وتدين بشدة الانتهاكات التي ترتكبها قوات الدعم السريع وتطال المدنيين الأبرياء، بما في ذلك أعمال العنف والهجمات التي تستهدف المدنيين والأعيان المدنية أو تعرقل وصولهما إلى الخدمات الأساسية. وتؤكد دولة الكويت أن المسار الأمثل لمعالجة الأزمة السودانية يمر عبر الوقف الفوري لإطلاق النار وتغليب لغة الحوار واستئناف عملية سياسية شاملة يقودها السودانيون أنفسهم، وبما يحفظ سيادة السودان ووحدته وسلامة أراضيه واستقلال قراره الوطني، ويدعم الجهود الرامية إلى تحقيق تسوية سلمية شاملة ومستدامة تلبي تطلعات شعبه في الأمن والاستقرار. وختاما، تدعو دولة الكويت إلى وحدة موقف المجتمع الدولي إزاء معاناة الشعب السوداني الشقيق، وإلى دعم الجهود الرامية إلى وقف إطلاق النار وتخفيف المعاناة الإنسانية وتحقيق السلام والاستقرار في السودان الشقيق. شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar.
سيد الرئيس، تعرب دولة قطر عن بالغ قلقها إزاء استمرار معاناة الشعب السوداني والتصعيد والهجمات المتكررة من القوات الدعم السريع على المنشآت المدنية في مدينة الأبيض وما حولها، وتدعو كافة الأطراف إلى احترام القانون الدولي الإنساني والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان ونزع فتيل التوتر وضبط النفس وتجنب القتال الذي سيؤدي إلى عواقب كارثية على المدنيين. وتؤكد بلادي على ضرورة الحوار بين كافة الأطراف السودانية لإنهاء النزاع المسلح بشكل دائم لمعالجة الأوضاع الإنسانية وإطلاق مفاوضات واسعة تفضي في نهاية المطاف إلى اتفاق شامل وسلام مستدام. وتجدد بلادي دعمها الثابت لوحدة واستقلال وسيادة وسلامة أراضي جمهورية السودان ورفضها لأي شكل من أشكال التدخل في شؤونه الداخلية والاحترام الكامل لخيارات شعبه الشقيق في الحرية والسلام والعدالة والازدهار. وختاما، نؤكد أهمية احترام رغبة الحكومة السودانية وأهمية البناء على آليات مجلس حقوق الإنسان القائمة التي تحظى بموافقة وثقة الحكومة السودانية وتتمتع بإمكانية التفاعل والنفاذ على الأرض. شكرا للسيد الرئيس.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bulgaria.
President, Bulgaria aligns itself with the statement made by the European Union. Bulgaria is deeply concerned by the significant escalation of the conflict in Sudan's North Kordofan state. We are alarmed by the drastically deteriorating human rights situation resulting from siege-like conditions that have persisted for 18 months. This has had a significant adverse impact on the civilian population. Al-Obeid must not become another El-Fasher. Prevention, protection of civilians and unhindered humanitarian access must guide the collective response. We strongly condemn all violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law, including acts that may amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. We call upon all parties to take immediate measures to protect civilians and humanitarian personnel whose safety and security must be respected in accordance with international humanitarian law. Bulgaria calls for an immediate ceasefire. Bulgaria reiterates its support for the independent international fact-finding mission. Lasting peace in Sudan can only be achieved through the protection of civilians, full respect of international law, accountability for all violations, and an inclusive Sudanese-led political process. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt.
السيد الرئيس، نجتمع مجددا لمناقشة الفظائع التي تتعرض لها مدينة سودانية جديدة. سندين وسنجب وسنجدد مطالبتنا بحماية المدنيين. أليس هذا ما حذرت منه مصر منذ اليوم الأول لاندلاع هذه الأزمة؟ ألم نحذر من أن المساواة بين الدولة السودانية وميليشيات متمردة سيشجعها على المضي قدما في حربها ويفتح الباب أمام مزيد من الفظائع وانتقال المأساة من مدينة سودانية إلى أخرى؟ تدين مصر بأشد العبارات الانتهاكات التي ترتكبها ميليشيات الدعم السريع في مدينة الأوبيد، والتي تعيد إلى الأذهان ما شهدته الفاشر والجنينة وغيرها من المدن السودانية، وتؤكد أن الحفاظ على وحدة السودان وسيادته وسلامة أراضيه وصون مؤسساته الوطنية ورفض أي محاولات لتقسيمه أو إنشاء كيانات موازية فيه هو السبيل الوحيد للحفاظ على السودان وصون حقوق شعبه. تؤكد أن الأولوية العاجلة اليوم تتمثل في التوصل إلى هدنة إنسانية تمهد لوقف شامل لإطلاق النار وإطلاق عملية سياسية سودانية خالصة دون أي تدخلات خارجية. ختاما، يتطلب الوضع في السودان موقفا مسؤولا من هذا المجلس يقوم على دعم الآليات التي تحظى بثقة السودان وتعزيز المؤسسات والآليات الوطنية كركيزة لا غنى عنها لتحقيق العدالة وحماية حقوق الإنسان. شكرا.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sweden. Okay. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain.
Gracias, señor presidente. Alto comisionado. España se suma a la declaración de la Unión Europea y reconoce la importancia de este debate urgente en la labor preventiva de este Consejo. Ante el endurecimiento del cerco de las fuerzas de apoyo rápido sobre el Obeid, mi país expresa su temor a que vuelvan a repetirse las ya documentadas atrocidades cometidas en el Fasher, incluidos indicios de genocidio. Condenamos enérgicamente la intensificación de los ataques con uso creciente de drones contra la infraestructura esencial y la población civil de la ciudad, cuyo medio millón de habitantes, como ha alertado el Alto Comisionado, corren un altísimo riesgo de sufrir graves y masivas violaciones constitutivas de crímenes de guerra y contra la humanidad. Nos sumamos al llamamiento para el cese inmediato de la escalada militar contra el Obeid, para que se garantice el cumplimiento del derecho internacional humanitario y de los derechos humanos y para evitar una catástrofe humanitaria y una masacre inminentes. Presidente, instamos a las partes a que acuerden un cese el fuego, garanticen el acceso de la ayuda humanitaria, respeten la soberanía, la unidad e integridad territorial del país y no favorezcan la creación de estructuras estatales paralelas. Les urgimos a reanudar las negociaciones con el fin de impulsar un diálogo nacional político y civil dirigido al establecimiento de un gobierno civil representativo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Chile.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Nuestra delegación agradece la convocatoria a este debate urgente y la propuesta de resolución presentada en este contexto. Los reportes en la zona dan cuenta de la gravedad de la situación en el Obeid, donde cerca de 500.000 civiles enfrentan el riesgo inminente de sufrir atrocidades a gran escala. Evitar que se repita la devastadora tragedia ocurrida en el Fasher es un imperativo vital para este Consejo. Expresamos nuestra preocupación por el incremento en el uso de ataques con drones en zonas pobladas, destruyendo infraestructura civil crítica, tales como hospitales, escuelas y universidades. Condenamos estas acciones que han dejado miles de personas atrapadas en condiciones cercanas al asedio, privadas de servicios básicos esenciales como el agua y el combustible. También manifestamos nuestra más absoluta consternación por el efecto que este conflicto ejerce sobre mujeres y niños, quienes sufren de manera desproporcionada. Asimismo, condenamos el uso sostenido de la violencia sexual como arma de guerra, situación que lamentablemente la observamos cada vez de manera más frecuente en los conflictos actuales alrededor del globo. Señor presidente, hacemos un llamado urgente a las partes a un cese inmediato de las hostilidades, a garantizar el acceso humanitario rápido, seguro y sin impedimento y a cumplir estrictamente con el derecho internacional humanitario y los derechos humanos. De la misma manera, reiteramos la necesidad que los perpetradores rindan cuenta ante la justicia. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would like to express our appreciation for the coordination by the core group and their flexibility throughout the process. Japan is deeply concerned by the reports of the escalation of military mobilization by Rapid Support Forces, RSF, and the allied forces in and around al-Obeid in Sudan. This significantly increased the risk of violence against civilians and attacks on civilian infrastructure, as well as further escalation of the conflict in al-Obeid, the Kordofan region, and beyond. Given these alarming developments, integrated and coordinated action is urgently needed to prevent further atrocities and protect civilians. Al-Obeid must not become another El Fashar. From this perspective, Japan supports both the primary purpose and the convening of this urgent debate. We join our partners in calling upon the RSF and their allied forces to immediately cease any actions that put innocent lives at risk, obstruct humanitarian access, or contribute to further atrocities and suffering. Japan, together with the countries concerned, has been urging the relevant parties in Sudan to respect human rights and de-escalate tensions, commit to an immediate and permanent ceasefire, and improve access to humanitarian assistance. Japan is committed to continuing those efforts towards improving the situation in Sudan. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are appalled by the deteriorating situation in al-Obeid. As we have heard repeatedly this morning, escalating drone strikes have killed civilians and destroyed civilian infrastructure. Key supply routes have been hit, along with fuel stations and the electricity grid. Access to basic services has been cut off for over 500,000 people and 100,000 already displaced. Last year, the world watched in horror as the Rapid Support Forces raped, pillaged and murdered their way through El Fasher. This cannot be repeated. As our Foreign Secretary has warned, al-Obeid is on the precipice of an atrocity that will deepen the wounds already inflicted on Sudan. This Council must act with urgency to help prevent further harm to civilians. The UK has led efforts to urge de-escalation and adherence to international law so civilians can leave safely and reach desperately needed aid. This year, the UK is providing £146 million in aid, including £15 million for local responders, ensuring life-saving aid is delivered to the front lines of the conflict. However, aid alone is insufficient. Ending impunity is essential. The fact-finding mission remains vital in establishing accountability for crimes, including any committed in al-Obeid. It must be granted full access across Sudan to carry out its mandate. The violence must end in Sudan. Civilians must be protected. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La France exprime sa plus vive inquiétude concernant la situation à al-Obeid, où les populations civiles sont privées d'accès aux ressources et services de base du fait du siège mis en place par les forces de soutien rapide. Le Haut-Commissaire et le Conseil de sécurité ont tous deux alerté sur la dégradation rapide de la situation sur place, faisant craindre la commission d'atrocités de masse. Dans ce contexte, la France exhorte les FSR à respecter le droit international humanitaire en cessant d'attaquer les populations civiles et les infrastructures civiles et en mettant fin à cette stratégie de siège qui affecte de manière indiscriminée les populations civiles. L'accès immédiat, sûr et sans entrave des acteurs humanitaires à ces populations doit être garanti. Les FSR et les forces armées soudanaises sont les principales responsables du conflit sans issue qui déstabilise le pays et la région tout entière depuis maintenant plusieurs années. La situation humanitaire demeure extrêmement préoccupante, marquée par des violations répétées du DIH et du droit international des droits de l'homme par les forces belligérantes que la mission d'établissement devra documenter. La France appelle toutes les parties à honorer leurs engagements en vertu de la déclaration de Jeddah, à considérer des mesures de confiance et à parvenir à un règlement pacifique du conflit, seul moyen de garantir le retour à la stabilité et la paix dans la région. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Mr. President, Indonesia condemns the escalating violence by the RSF against civilians in al-Obeid, including the internally displaced. We are alarmed by drone attacks on civilian infrastructure, cutting off essential services that al-Obeid people depend on to survive. This must end. We urge all states with influence to stop fueling its conflict and instead to support Sudan's path to peace and reaffirm its territorial integrity. If there is one message to this Council must send, it is civilians must be protected, a duty owed to all Sudanese by all parties, and the international community must constructively support Sudan in meeting it. That means three things. Press the RSF to hold its assault, and all parties to agree a durable ceasefire. Ensure rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access. Ensure credible, impartial accountability for violation by all parties, and we welcome the continued opening of the Adrer crossing as a vital humanitarian corridor. Finally, Indonesia notes the work of Sudan's National Investigation Committee for Accountability, and we support efforts of the African Union, the Office of the High Commissioner, and the League of Arab States toward peace and reconciliation. Only an inclusive, Sudanese-led and owned political process will bring lasting peace. I thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you. Before I continue, just to announce that the list of speakers is now closed. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya.
President, Kenya shares the concerns expressed by many delegations at the rapidly deteriorating situation in and around al-Obeid, North Kordofan, and welcome the efforts of the core group in calling for this urgent debate as a timely use of Council's prevention mandate. We express solidarity with the people of Sudan, particularly civilians facing siege conditions and displacement and insecurity. We echo the call for an immediate ceasefire by all parties without precondition, and the need for full respect of international humanitarian and human rights law. The protection of civilians, including women and children, must remain paramount, and the attacks against humanitarian personnel and civilian infrastructure must cease. We urge the rapid, safe, and unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance, including through cross-lines and cross-border modalities, and call on the international community to scale up predictable, sustained, and equitable support to frontline states to address the increasing humanitarian burden and its broader socio-economic and security impact on the Horn of Africa. Kenya reiterates that there is no military solution. A political resolution remains urgent, anchored in the Sudanese-led, Sudanese-owned process that is inclusive and ensures that the meaningful participation of all stakeholders. We further stress the importance of coherence across international efforts in alignment with AU and IGAD-led initiatives. We emphasize the importance of accountability pursued in a manner that promotes dialogue and sustains engagement towards long-term stability. Kenya remains committed as a regional actor to support efforts towards de-escalating stability and sustainable peace in Sudan. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Slovenia aligns itself with the EU statement. We are strongly condemning the reported atrocities and are deeply alarmed with continued escalating violence in al-Obeid, despite repeated calls for restraint and protection of civilians. Just 8 months ago, the fall of al-Fasher led to tens of thousands of deaths and widespread ethnic targeting and sexual violence, in what the UN fact-finding mission assessed as the hallmarks of genocide. We need to act today to prevent a similar tragedy leading to serious international crimes in al-Obeid, with women and children bearing the biggest brunt of the conflict. The primary responsibility for bringing conflict in Sudan, including in al-Obeid, to an end, rests with the leadership of both the Sudanese armed forces and the RSF and their affiliated militias, as well as those who provide them with arms, financing, and other forms of support. We call on the RSF to hold its offensive on al-Obeid immediately. All parties to the conflict and those with influence over them must de-escalate, protect civilians, ensure safe, sustained and unimpeded humanitarian access, and end all support that fuels the conflict. All violations and abuses must be investigated and those responsible held accountable. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Mr. President, South Africa thanks the core group for calling this urgent debate, which falls within the mandate of this Council as enshrined in its founding resolution, and joining us to contribute towards the prevention of human rights violations and respond promptly to human rights emergencies. The situation in al-Obeid requires us to act in accordance with this mandate. Developments there closely mirror the Rapid Security Forces, the RSF's 18-month siege on al-Fasher, leading to the mass killing of the innocent, which the Council's fact-finding mission characterized as bearing all the hallmarks of genocide. Sadly, the atrocities being committed in al-Obeid are not new. As the High Commissioner recently warned, we have seen the script before. Beyond al-Fasher, we saw it at the Zamzam IDP camp and in Al-Janaina. As a state party to the Genocide Convention, South Africa is obligated to act to ensure that preventable atrocities should never be repeated. What we need now is action within our mandate to protect the people of al-Obeid, to ensure humanitarian access and to press all parties towards a ceasefire. We reiterate that there can be no military solution to the conflict. Those responsible must be held accountable, including those who aid and abet them. All foreign interference and efforts to fragment Sudan must end. The flow of arms must stop, and the guns must be silenced. Above all, the human rights of the people of al-Obeid must be protected. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Mr. President, the Republic of Korea is deeply concerned over continued violence across Sudan, further exacerbating an already dire humanitarian situation. We are particularly alarmed that al-Obeid, North Kordofan, now faces an imminent risk of large-scale atrocities, as the city, already gripped by siege-like conditions, is reportedly coming under intensified drone strikes. We condemn these attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure, including hospitals and humanitarian convoys. As the High Commissioner has warned, we must not allow a repeat of these preventable atrocities. We are especially troubled by the disproportionate impact of this crisis on women and children, who face heightened risks of sexual and gender-based violence and displacement. The Republic of Korea once again urges all parties to the conflict to immediately cease hostilities, allow safe and unhindered humanitarian access, and fully comply with their obligations under international law. We also call on external actors to refrain from providing any support that fuels the conflict. Ensuring accountability remains essential. The Republic of Korea supports the mandate of the fact-finding mission, including its urgent inquiry into the situation in al-Obeid. We remain committed to working with the international community to ease the suffering of the Sudanese people and support the efforts for durable peace. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to a distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Mr. President, for more than 3 years, the Sudan has remained in the grip of a devastating conflict with civilians bearing the heaviest cost. The situation in and around al-Obeid is particularly alarming, given reports of substantial rapid support forces reinforcements and the risk of a ground offensive. As noted by the High Commissioner in his statement of 18 June and others, the RSF's record of grave abuses and atrocities in al-Fasher and elsewhere in the Sudan underscores the imminent risk of mass atrocities. The growing use of drones and advanced weaponry remains a matter of grave concern. The RSF must lift its siege of al-Obeid, halt its assault, comply with international humanitarian law and international human rights law, and protect civilians. We call for safe, rapid, sustained, and unhindered humanitarian access to those in need, and stress that attacks on humanitarian personnel are indefensible. It remains imperative to abide by the 2023 Jeddah Declaration of commitment to protect the civilians of Sudan. Sudan's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity must be preserved. Parallel governance structures must be firmly rejected. They would only prolong the conflict to which there is no military solution. Pakistan welcomes international and regional efforts to achieve an immediate ceasefire and to support an inclusive, Sudan-owned and Sudan-led political process. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Gracias, señor presidente. México expresa su profunda preocupación por el conflicto en Sudán, que se ha prolongado por más de 3 años sin señales de una solución. Ello ha resultado en el deterioro de la situación de derechos humanos y humanitaria, particularmente en el-Obeid. Estamos frente a una crisis que no permite la inacción de la comunidad internacional. 11,5 millones de personas han sido desplazadas por el conflicto. Condenamos enfáticamente los ataques contra civiles, hospitales, escuelas y cualquier infraestructura civil. Preocupa el impacto desproporcionado que la violencia y el trauma derivado del conflicto tiene sobre la niñez. Ninguna infancia debería crecer bajo el miedo de los ataques, verse privada de educación o quedarse sin acceso a servicios esenciales. México insiste en la necesidad de garantizar un acceso humanitario, seguro y sin obstáculos. Todas las partes están obligadas a respetar el derecho internacional humanitario de los derechos humanos y de los refugiados, en línea con la resolución 1556 del Consejo de Seguridad. Rechazamos toda injerencia extranjera, incluido el suministro de armas, que ha sido uno de los motores de este conflicto. Finalmente, México reitera su respaldo a la soberanía, la unidad y la integridad territorial de Sudán, incluido el derecho a disponer libremente de sus recursos naturales, condición necesaria para el disfrute de los derechos humanos. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Albania.
Mr. President, Albania aligns itself with the EU statement. Albania supports the request to convene this urgent debate and also the draft resolution presented by Germany, Ireland, Netherlands, Norway, and UK. My country is deeply concerned by the escalating violence against civilians, civilian infrastructure, and the growing risk of mass atrocity. We call all parties to immediately cease hostilities, respect international humanitarian law, protect civilians, and ensure rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access. There cannot be a military solution to this conflict. Only an inclusive Sudanese owned and Sudanese lead political process with support of international partners can bring peace and stability. Accountability must remain central. Albania supports the work of fact-finding mission, including collecting documents and preserve evidence. At the critical moment, the Human Rights Council must speak with one voice to protect civilians, support accountability, and reaffirm that serious violation of international law cannot go unanswered. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to a distinguished representative of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Kingdom of the Netherlands is alarmed by the imminent threat of an RSF result on al-Obeid. We align ourselves with the statements delivered by the EU and the Coalition for Atrocity Prevention and Justice in Sudan. We would like to highlight one aspect of this crisis, the unacceptable pervasiveness of conflict-related sexual violence in Sudan. Sexual violence used as a weapon of war is a serious violation of international law and may constitute war crimes or crimes against humanity. Such violations must stop. We call on all conflict parties to cease all forms of sexual and gender-based violence. We call for a survivor-centered response with access to medical, psychosocial and legal support. Holding perpetrators accountable lays the foundation for justice and sustainable peace, and we will continue to support accountability efforts such as the fact-finding mission. But more importantly, we must prevent the terrible harm inflicted on civilians in El Fasher from also befalling the civilians of al-Obeid. We urge all parties to the conflict to uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law and those with influence over the parties to use that influence now to prevent further atrocities and destruction. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to a distinguished representative of Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ghana is deeply concerned by the escalating violence in and around al-Obeid and the grave risk of further atrocities against civilians. Like others, we unequivocally condemn attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure and call on all parties to the conflict, particularly the Rapid Support Forces, to immediately cease hostilities, respect international humanitarian and human rights law, and ensure civilian protection. We underscore the urgency of acting now to prevent a recurrence of the atrocities witnessed in El Fasher. We also stress that the continued flow of arms and external support following the conflict must cease. We underline the necessity for accountability for all war crimes committed in the ongoing armed conflict. Mr. President, we commend state and non-state actors that are cooperating with regional and international peace initiatives, particularly the African Union's Roadmap for Peace in Sudan, and call on all parties to implement existing peace processes, including the Jeddah Agreement, in order to protect civilians and facilitate the unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance in Sudan. We finally reiterate our support for a coordinated international response led by the AU, IGAD, the UN, the League of Arab States, and key partners to advance a sustainable resolution of the crisis in Sudan. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brazil has been following with great concern the situation in al-Obeid, as well as the escalating violence across the broader Kordofan and Darfur regions. We deeply regret that the Human Rights Council must once again convene an urgent meeting to address the ongoing conflict in Sudan, reflecting a lack of progress since the crisis erupted. Brazil strongly condemns the indiscriminate attacks and siege tactics deployed against civilian infrastructure and medical facilities in al-Obeid. We specifically condemn the widespread reports of sexual violence, arbitrary detentions, and the forced displacement of communities. We reiterate that starvation must never be used as a method of warfare. We call on all parties to immediately lift any blockades, ensure free and unimpeded humanitarian relief to al-Obeid, and guarantee the absolute protection of humanitarian workers. We recall the strict obligation of all actors to respect international human rights and international humanitarian law. Finally, we reiterate our support for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and the fact-finding mission for Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of the Dominican Republic.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. República Dominicana saluda la convocatoria de este debate urgente en un momento de extrema gravedad para la población civil en el Obeid y sus alrededores. Compartimos la grave preocupación expresada por el Alto Comisionado y demás delegaciones aquí presentes debido a la rápida escalada de la violencia, el deterioro de la situación humanitaria y el riesgo inminente de que se cometan nuevas atrocidades contra cientos de miles de civiles inocentes. Condenamos de la manera más categórica los ataques contra la población civil, la infraestructura esencial y el personal humanitario, así como las restricciones al acceso de alimentos, agua y asistencia médica. Nos unimos al llamado para un cese al fuego inmediato, un cese de las hostilidades y a la reanudación de un proceso político inclusive, liderado por los propios sudaneses, que preserve la unidad e integración territorial del país. Reiteramos que todas las partes en el conflicto deben garantizar la protección de la población civil y facilitar un acceso humanitario rápido, seguro y sin obstáculos. Al mismo tiempo, instamos a la comunidad internacional y a otros actores regionales relevantes a redoblar sus esfuerzos diplomáticos y de cooperación para apoyar mecanismos que propicien una solución política viable y sostenible sobre el terreno. Reafirmamos la importancia de garantizar la rendición de cuentas. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
主席先生，距离人权理事会去年底就苏丹法希尔地区人权状况召开特别会议仅8个月，苏欧拜伊德及其周边地区人权状况再度引发关注。中方多次强调，发生在法希尔的大规模暴行绝不能再度上演。 苏丹人民的生命权等基本人权应当得到切实尊重。快支部队应保持克制，尽快停火，履行国际法律义务。中方重申，人权理事会有关讨论应严格遵守授权，充分尊重苏丹的主权、统一和领土完整，维护苏人民主导地位。中方一贯反对未经当事国同意强推国别机制，有关事实调查团设立之初就未经苏同意。国际社会不能不顾苏反对扩大授权，无助于解决问题，还会使问题复杂化。我们希望人权理事会在尊重并听取苏丹本国意见的基础上寻求共识，推动通过对话谈判达成持久的解决办法。谢谢主席。
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Italy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Italy aligns with the EU statement and is deeply concerned about the deterioration of the human rights situation in the North Kordofan region, and specifically in and around al-Obeid, which aggravates one of the world's most devastating humanitarian crises. We are alarmed by serious violation of international human rights and humanitarian law, including the restriction of humanitarian access and the use of drones against civilians, as reported by the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We urge all parties to uphold international humanitarian law, protect civilians, and facilitate rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access. Italy is at the forefront of humanitarian assistance, supporting vulnerable civilians, especially children. Under the Italy for Sudan initiative, we have allocated fundings to provide essential services, deliver food and humanitarian supplies to the population. Italy continues to stand in solidarity with the people of Sudan and to work for a political solution to restore stability and security in the country, with respect for human rights and the rule of law as its core. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. يعرب العراق عن إدانته وقلقه بشأن انتهاكات حقوق الإنسان في السودان وخصوصا الأبيض الناتجة عن استهداف المنشآت الطبية ومن بينها الصندوق القومي للإمدادات الطبية ومركز كردفان للأورام والمستوصف البريطاني، الأمر الذي يؤدي إلى تعريض الصحة العامة للانهيار وانتشار الأوبئة والأمراض المعدية، وكذلك قصف المنشآت التعليمية منها جامعة كردفان بما يساهم في تعطيل المسيرة العلمية فيها، وتعريض الأبرياء لخطر صعوبة الوصول لمياه الشرب واستخدام التجويع كسلاح حرب، وكل ذلك يؤدي إلى انتشار حركة نزوح واسعة للمواطنين الأبرياء وحرمانهم من أبسط مقومات الحياة وتعريض الأطفال للتشريد. السيد الرئيس، يؤكد وفد بلادي دعم جمهورية العراق الكامل لسيادة ووحدة السودان الشقيق، ويشدد على حل المشكلات بالطرق السلمية والعودة إلى طاولة المفاوضات ونبذ العنف للحفاظ على وحدة السودان وسلامة أراضيه، ومساندة هذا المسار في إطار حوار وطني يسهم في إنهاء الأزمة وتحقيق الأمن والاستقرار للشعب السوداني. ختاما، يدعو العراق المجتمع الدولي لدعم عملية السلام في جمهورية السودان حفاظا على سيادته ووحدة أراضيه وعدم التدخل في شؤونه الداخلية واحترام خيارات شعبه. شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Gambia.
The Gambia, good morning, Mr. President. The Gambia joins this urgent debate with deep concern over the human rights situation in and around al-Obeid, Sudan. We view this debate as an opportunity for the Council to help prevent further deterioration. The priority must be to protect civilians, prevent further loss of life, and ensure safe and unhindered humanitarian access to those in need. At the center of the debate must be the Sudanese people. Their right to life, as recognized by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, must be respected and protected. No military objective or political grievance can justify conduct that places civilians at risk or deprives them of humanitarian assistance. The Gambia stresses the need for full respect for the sovereignty, unity, independence, and territorial integrity of the Sudan. Any sustainable solution must be Sudanese-owned, African-led, and supported in a manner that strengthens peace, national cohesion, and civilian protection. All actors with influence over the situation must act responsibly. We call for an immediate cessation of hostilities and full respect for international human rights law and international humanitarian law. The Gambia also recalls the Banjul Joint Declaration on Sudan of May 2026 as an important African contribution to civilian protection, evidence preservation, accountability, and victim-centered justice, and must be respected and translated into concrete action, and we submit. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to a distinguished representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are deeply concerned by the reports of dire humanitarian situation in and around al-Obeid. Ever since the current conflict started in Sudan in April 2023, the people of Sudan have been the worst affected. The conflict has caused immense loss of civilian life and wide-scale destruction of property. Heavy fighting, mass atrocities against civilians, and increasing fragmentation of the country are driving displacement and affecting the wider region. Refugee camps are inadequately equipped to handle such a huge scale of mass displacement within the country. The prolonged conflict has resulted in significant contraction in Sudanese economy in absolute terms, with widespread destruction of infrastructure, property, trade, and agricultural production. Sudan's population is facing acute food scarcity, extreme inflation, and leaving millions dependent on humanitarian assistance for survival. India has always attached great importance to its relations with the friendly people of Sudan. We have extended humanitarian assistance to Sudan in the form of medical supplies and food aid, including 27 tons of life-saving medicines and 2,000 metric tons of rice since 2023. These measures reflect India's continued commitment to supporting the people of Sudan during the ongoing conflict and humanitarian crisis. We stand by our friends in Sudan in their time of difficulty. Mr. President, we have consistently underscored the importance of engagement and reconciliation to resolve the conflict in Sudan. We reiterate our call for restraint, dialogue towards peace and stability in Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cyprus.
Thank you, Mr. President. Cyprus aligns itself with the EU statement. We are alarmed by the unfolding situation in al-Obeid and stress the imperative of preventing a repetition of al-Fashir and the mass atrocities committed against innocent civilians. We call for the immediate cessation of hostilities throughout Sudan and for the protection of all civilians as foreseen under international humanitarian law. The horrific levels of sexual and gender-based violence witnessed in this conflict demand particular protection for women and girls, as well as robust action to end the weaponization of such violence. There cannot be impunity for these and other serious crimes committed in this conflict. Peace and reconciliation require justice and accountability. At the same time, humanitarian aid must reach all Sudanese civilians, including in al-Obeid, and the looting of aid must stop. Last, but by no means least, Cyprus underlines the importance of respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Sudan and ensuring its unity. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président, la Suisse condamne avec la plus grande fermeté la poursuite des violences au Soudan, notamment à al-Obeid. Les attaques répétées des forces de soutien rapide et de leurs alliés, y compris au moyen de drones armés, violent le droit international humanitaire et aggravent une crise déjà catastrophique marquée par de nombreuses violations des droits de l'homme. Nous appelons toutes les parties au conflit à mettre fin immédiatement aux violences et aux attaques contre les civils. Nous ne pouvons plus passer sous silence le rôle des acteurs extérieurs qui alimentent ce conflit. Comme l'a rappelé la haute commissaire adjointe le 15 juin dernier, des puissances étrangères fournissent différentes formes de soutien militaire qui prolongent les hostilités et contribuent aux violations largement documentées, y compris des crimes de guerre et des crimes contre l'humanité. Et comme l'a relevé la mission d'établissement des faits concernant al-Fashir, ces atrocités présentent des signes distinctifs d'un génocide. Nous appelons les acteurs extérieurs à cesser immédiatement tout soutien militaire, y compris de personnel, et à user de leur influence afin de prévenir de nouvelles atrocités. Nous rappelons ainsi l'obligation de prévention qui incombe aux États parties à la Convention sur le génocide. Nous soutenons l'extension de l'embargo sur les armes du Conseil de sécurité à l'ensemble du territoire soudanais. La Suisse souligne enfin que les responsables de crimes internationaux devront répondre de leurs actes devant la justice. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. We shall now proceed with the list of observers of the Council, and we begin with the distinguished representative of Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation aligns itself with the EU statement. Belgium supports this urgent debate on the situation in al-Obeid. As the High Commissioner said, we have seen this playbook before. Belgium is deeply concerned by widespread human rights violations and abuses, including sexual and gender-based violence, and the dire humanitarian situation. We are also concerned by threats against human rights defenders and civil society, whose work remains essential in documenting violations. We call on all parties to ensure the protection of civilians. In al-Obeid, drone attacks, artillery shelling and attacks on humanitarian and life-sustaining services must cease. Unlike during the previous special session on al-Fasher, we can and must exert pressure now to prevent further deterioration of an already dire situation. The Sudanese people deserve peace and accountability. We call on the RSF to immediately halt their assault on al-Obeid and reiterate our call to all parties for a ceasefire. There can be no military solution. All states must apply maximum pressure on the RSF, the SAF, and their allies to prevent atrocities, protect civilians, and fully comply with IHL. External support must stop now. Finally, Belgium fully supports the mandate of the FFM and calls on all parties to cooperate with it and with international accountability mechanisms. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iran.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Islamic Republic of Iran expresses its deep concern over the worsening human rights and humanitarian situation in and around al-Obeid, as the conflict in Sudan continues to spread. The world's failure to respond effectively to the tragedy in Sudan has allowed this catastrophe to move from one city to another. After the grave violations in al-Fasher and Darfur, North Kordofan, and its capital, al-Obeid now faces the same alarming pattern. Iran strongly condemns the continued supply of arms, financial, logistical, and military support, including advanced drone capabilities, and the recruitment and training of fighters to the rapid support forces by certain external actors. We call for the full respect for international humanitarian law, accountability for all external actors fueling this conflict, and equal treatment of all crises without double standards. Iran reaffirms its unwavering support for the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and unity of Sudan, rejects any form of foreign interference, including any attempt to impose a situation of dual governance, and stresses that only a Sudanese-led solution can secure lasting peace and stability. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria.
Thank you, Mr. President. Austria aligns itself with the EU statement. Austria is gravely alarmed by the rapidly deteriorating human rights situation in al-Obeid and the imminent risk of mass atrocities. We echo the High Commissioner's warning that the pattern of violence witnessed in al-Fasher and Samsam must not be repeated. The militarization of al-Obeid, including its strategic use as a potential launch base for drone operations, risks further escalating the conflict and undermining prospects for peace. Austria calls on the RSF to immediately halt their offense on al-Obeid and to stop drone attacks on civilian infrastructure. Austria calls on all parties to fully respect international humanitarian law and international human rights law and grant unhindered humanitarian access, and urges all external actors to cease support that fuels this conflict and its atrocities and to uphold the arms embargo. We welcome the draft resolution, as independent and impartial investigations into all alleged violations and abuses of IHRL and IHL and full accountability for those responsible are essential to delivering justice for victims, ending impunity, and laying the foundations for lasting peace in Sudan. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Luxembourg.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le Luxembourg souscrit à la déclaration de l'Union européenne. Nous sommes profondément préoccupés par la détérioration de la situation à al-Obeid et dans ses environs. Les frappes de drones visant des infrastructures civiles essentielles, les pénuries croissantes et les attaques contre les acteurs humanitaires privent la population de tout moyen de survie. Une nouvelle fois, les populations les plus vulnérables, en particulier les femmes et les enfants, paient le prix le plus lourd. Il est de notre responsabilité collective de les protéger. Nous réitérons notre appel, déjà lancé devant ce Conseil en novembre 2025, à prévenir toute répétition des violations commises à El-Fasher dans les Kordofans. Nous exhortons les parties à instaurer immédiatement une trêve humanitaire et garantir un passage sûr pour les évacuations de la population. Les appels répétés de ce Conseil et du Haut-Commissaire ne doivent plus rester lettre morte. Le Luxembourg appelle l'urgence d'assurer la redevabilité pour toutes les violations du droit international et du droit international humanitaire. Le peuple soudanais fait preuve d'une résilience remarquable et mérite enfin la paix, la sécurité et la dignité. Nous appelons toutes les parties ainsi que les acteurs extérieurs au conflit à œuvrer impérativement à une désescalade de la violence. Nous réaffirmons notre soutien au peuple soudanais. Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein.
Mr. President, Liechtenstein is gravely concerned by the escalating violence and rapidly deteriorating humanitarian situation in and around al-Obeid. 18 months of siege-like conditions, reports of a significant build-up of rapid support forces and allied forces, intensified drone strikes and artillery shelling point to an imminent risk of further mass atrocities against civilians. The horrors documented in al-Fasher and Samsam IDP camp, as vividly recalled at the beginning of this meeting, must not be repeated in al-Obeid. International humanitarian and human rights law is not optional. Liechtenstein calls on all parties to immediately halt attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure, allow safe, rapid and unhindered humanitarian access, and ensure safe passage for those seeking protection. We further reiterate our grave concern about external interference sustaining this conflict. The supply of weapons and equipment, financing and private military contractors prolongs the suffering of the Sudanese people and violates the Security Council's arms embargo. This must stop. The states providing such support bear direct responsibility for its consequences. This Council must act with urgency to prevent further atrocities, strengthen accountability, support the work of the fact-finding mission, and underscore the potential role of the International Criminal Court in ending impunity. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. منذ اندلاع النزاع بالسودان انطلقت المملكة من مسؤوليتها تجاه أمر الأشقاء في السودان وقادت جهودا دبلوماسية في سبيل حل الأزمة السودانية نتج عنها التوقيع على إعلان جدة بتاريخ 11 مايو 2023 المعني بالالتزام بحماية المدنيين في السودان وعدم عرقلة المساعدات الإنسانية واحترام القانون الدولي الإنساني والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان. إن أولوية المملكة تتمثل في تحقيق استقرار السودان والوصول إلى وقف فوري لإطلاق النار والحفاظ على مؤسسات الدولة السودانية من الانهيار وصون وحدتها وسلامة أراضيها ومقدراتها. إن معالجة الأزمة في السودان تتطلب عملية سياسية سودانية تعزز المؤسسات الوطنية وتحترم سيادة السودان. السيد الرئيس، تؤكد المملكة موقفها الثابت الداعي إلى الوقف الفوري للحرب في السودان، كما تعرب عن بالغ قلقها إزاء حشود قوات الدعم السريع وحصارها لمدينة الأبيض، وتحذر من تكرار الفظائع والانتهاكات بحق المدنيين. وتجدد المملكة رفضها لأي إجراءات غير شرعية تمس وحدة السودان وسيادته، وترحب بالجهود الإقليمية والدولية الرامية إلى إنهاء الأزمة، داعية المجتمع الدولي إلى تكثيف جهوده السياسية وتعزيز استجابته الإنسانية بما يخفف معاناة الشعب السوداني الشقيق. وشكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of UN Women.
Thank you, Mr. President. UN Women is deeply concerned by the escalating risk of mass atrocity in and around al-Obeid. Intensifying hostility, growing displacement, shrinking humanitarian access, and rising protection risks are placing civilians, especially women and girls, in increasing danger. Further escalation could have devastating consequences for civilian protection, humanitarian operation, and stability across Kordofan and beyond. Entire communities are facing unimaginable hardship. Women and girls are exposed to heightened risk of gender-based violence, while access to life-saving health and protection services continues to deteriorate. We call all parties to prioritize three actions. First, reaffirm the protection of civilians and demand full respect for international humanitarian and human rights law, including accountability for conflict-related sexual violence and other grave violations. Second, call for safe, sustained, and unhindered humanitarian access alongside strengthening gender-responsive protection services for women, girls, and other groups facing heightened risk. Third, recognize and invest in the leadership of Sudanese women's and local women's organizations whose frontline work is essential for protection, humanitarian response, and building pathways towards sustainable peace. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belarus.
Благодарю, господин председатель. Обсуждение страновых ситуаций в СПЧ и принятие соответствующих решений должны проходить с полным учетом позиции затронутого государства, которое представляет интересы народа. Важно, чтобы повышенное международное внимание к ситуации в Судане в самое ближайшее время было нацелено на укрепление потенциала правительства по стабилизации обстановки, улучшению гуманитарной ситуации и обеспечению первоочередных потребностей населения, включая внутренне перемещенных лиц и беженцев. Попытки навязать правительству сотрудничество с какими-либо неконсенсусными механизмами – это отход от принципов международного сотрудничества, основанного на суверенном равенстве государств. Подтверждаем позицию Беларуси против страновых резолюций и политизированных мандатов, которые не поддерживает затрагиваемое государство. Призываем международное сообщество уделять приоритетное внимание гуманитарной деятельности и помощи населению страны, включая продовольственную помощь и восстановление инфраструктуры. Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria.
Mr. President, today's debate on the situation in another Sudanese city serves as a stark reminder of our collective failure to prevent what has now become the major humanitarian tragedy worldwide, our collective failure to shield the victims in Sudan and to protect their country from the mounting external interferences, and last but not least, our collective failure to champion dialogue over confrontation, mediation over interference, and reconciliation over division. For Algeria, today is the day to reaffirm the fundamental imperatives that must guide any genuine effort for the sake of peace in Sudan. First and foremost, uphold Sudan's sovereignty, national unity, and territorial integrity, while rejecting all attempts to fragment the country and its institutions. Secondly, condemn all those that continue from outside to fuel violence, to deepen the suffering, and to undermine every prospect for peace. Thirdly, and lastly, work towards a Sudanese-led and Sudanese-owned political process that brings together all sons and daughters of Sudan to chart their own future through dialogue, unity, and reconciliation. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jordan.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيد الرئيس، يجتمع مجلسنا مجددا لمناقشة الأوضاع في السودان الشقيق، والمطلوب اتخاذ موقف واضح. التطورات الخطيرة في مدينة الأبيض ومحيطها بولاية شمال كردفان تشكل كابوسا يؤرق حياة المدنيين. يواجهون أزمة إنسانية متفاقمة جراء التصعيد العسكري، حصار طويل وتدمير للبنية التحتية المدنية، وهو ما أدى إلى نقص حاد في المياه والوقود والخدمات الأساسية. يهدد حياة عشرات الآلاف من المدنيين، ويؤكد الأردن على ضرورة وقف فوري للتصعيد العسكري واحترام القانون الدولي الإنساني، وهي مسؤولية على جميع الأطراف، وحماية المدنيين والبنية التحتية المدنية. كما يدعو إلى تسهيل وصول المساعدات الإنسانية دون عائق، وفتح ممرات آمنة للإغاثة والنازحين، انطلاقا من التزام الأردن الثابت بالسلام وحقوق الإنسان، ودعما لوحدة السودان وسلامة أراضيه. ندعو إلى تبني خطوات جادة تسهم في إيجاد حل سياسي شامل ينهي الصراع، يحقق المصالحة الوطنية، ويضمن مستقبلا آمنا للسودان وشعبها الطيب. ختاما، للمجلس ولاية هامة نأمل أن تسهم بفعالية في حماية المدنيين الأبرياء وتعزيز المساءلة والعدالة، وشكرا لكم.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Morocco.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. يعرب المغرب عن بالغ قلقه حول الوضعية في بلد السودان الشقيق على إثر الأحداث الدامية التي تشهدها مدينة الأبيض، كما يندد بالمخاطر الشديدة التي تحيط بحياة وسلامة المدنيين الأبرياء وخاصة النساء والأطفال. ويعرب المغرب عن كامل تضامنه مع السودان الشقيق في هذه الظروف المؤلمة. وفي هذا السياق الدقيق تناشد المملكة المغربية المنتظم الدولي بتقديم المساعدات الإنسانية اللازمة وضمان إيصالها بانسيابية بهدف التخفيف عن معاناة السكان المدنيين من مظاهر سوء التغذية وعدم توفر المياه الصالحة للشرب. وتجدد المملكة المغربية دعواتها لدعم جهود تعزيز المؤسسات الوطنية وإعادة إطلاق الحوار الوطني والمصالحة. وفي الختام يجدد المغرب التعبير عن دعمه للمبادرات الرامية إلى معالجة الأسباب الجذرية لهذا النزاع والحفاظ على السيادة الوطنية والوحدة الترابية لبلد السودان الشقيق. وشكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of Canada.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are alarmed by reports of a possible RSF ground offensive in al-Obeid, alongside deadly drone strikes that have damaged fuel depots, water stations, and health services, placing at least 500,000 people at grave risk and leaving families without reliable access to basic necessities. The warning signs echo those seen in al-Fashir, and we are deeply concerned that similar atrocities could unfold in the near future in al-Obeid. An immediate de-escalation is urgently required. All parties must comply fully with applicable international humanitarian law and international human rights law and take precautions to protect the civilian population and civilian objects against the effects of attacks, including the use of drones and shelling. They must also allow and facilitate the rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian aid to al-Obeid and surrounding areas. We also urge all external actors to cease the supply of weapons and financial support that fuels the conflict. Canada supports essential UN and regional accountability efforts, including those of the African Commission and the FFM for Sudan, to document violations and advance accountability for atrocity crimes, and we support a strong resolution to reinforce these efforts. We urge all parties to the conflict and those with influence over them to use every diplomatic avenue available to secure an immediate ceasefire and advance a credible path toward a negotiated and lasting peace. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malta.
Thank you, Mr. President. Malta aligns itself with the statement delivered by the EU. We join the High Commissioner and the conveners of this urgent debate in expressing our deepest concern at reports of serious human rights violations and abuses in and around al-Obeid, north of Kordofan, and at the risk of further deterioration with grave consequences for civilians. We share the High Commissioner's alarm and echo his call for urgent preventive action. As we meet here again, regrettably, the people of Sudan have endured repeated violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law, including sexual and gender-based violence. These violations must cease immediately. Malta calls on all actors, foreign and domestic, with influence on the RSF and the SAF to halt and prevent all forms of violations, protect civilians, and to ensure that their actions are contributors to peace and not to violence. All actors, regardless of their allegiance, have an obligation to uphold international humanitarian law and international human rights law, and to hold violators accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Peru.
Presidente, Perú expresa su profunda preocupación por la situación humanitaria y de derechos humanos en y alrededor de al-Obeid, en un contexto de graves violaciones y abusos de los derechos humanos contra la población civil en el conflicto que azota Sudán. El Perú comparte la consternación expresada por el Alto Comisionado en su advertencia del 18 de junio y respalda el llamado del Consejo de Seguridad el 20 de junio sobre el riesgo inminente de comisión de nuevas atrocidades, pérdida de vidas humanas y el agravamiento de las ya severas condiciones que enfrenta la población civil. Al respecto, y enfatizando el factor clave de la prevención, resulta indispensable actuar de manera oportuna y eficaz, así como coordinada, por lo que el Perú hace un llamado a todas las partes en conflicto a un cese del fuego inmediato, a la protección efectiva de la población civil, así como al pleno respeto del derecho internacional humanitario y del derecho internacional de los derechos humanos. Resulta igualmente crucial garantizar el acceso humanitario, permitir el paso seguro de las personas que deseen abandonar las zonas afectadas y proteger la infraestructura civil esencial. Finalmente, el Perú reafirma su respaldo a la FFM y reitera la necesidad de investigar todas las violaciones y abusos cometidos, asegurar la rendición de cuentas y avanzar hacia la solución pacífica, inclusiva y sostenible. Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland.
President, Ireland aligns with the statements of the EU and the Coalition for Atrocity Prevention and Justice for Sudan. Ireland is deeply concerned by the RSF's ongoing offensive on al-Obeid. Their established modus operandi is clear. If al-Obeid falls, there is a grave risk of mass atrocities being committed against civilians, including widespread and systematic conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence. Ireland strongly condemns the pervasive and deliberate targeting of the civilian population and critical infrastructure, including through the increasing use of drone strikes. Throughout this conflict, the RSF has used starvation as a method of warfare, with al-Obeid enduring recurring siege-like conditions for over 3 years now. Ireland calls urgently on the RSF to end the siege of al-Obeid. We also call on the parties to the conflict to immediately cease hostilities and to adhere to their obligations under international humanitarian law. Civilians, including humanitarian personnel, must be protected. Civilians must be able to leave the city safely, and all parties must ensure rapid, unimpeded and sustained humanitarian access. It is vital that all states with influence advocate for a peaceful resolution of the conflict and refrain from any actions that could fuel further violence. Finally, President, we reiterate our full support to the OHCHR and the UN fact-finding mission for Sudan. Impunity will not be tolerated. Thank you, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. Greece aligns with the EU statement. We are deeply alarmed by the imminent risk of mass atrocities in and around al-Obeid. The people of Sudan have already endured unimaginable suffering. They must not be condemned to yet another humanitarian catastrophe. We call on all parties to the conflict to cease hostilities immediately, protect civilians, refrain from targeting public infrastructure, guarantee full, safe and unhindered humanitarian access, including through effective humanitarian corridors, and fully respect international humanitarian law and international human rights law. We also call on all those who arm, finance or otherwise sustain the conflict to end their support without delay. Their actions fuel further violence and human suffering. Accountability is indispensable. Those responsible for violations of international humanitarian law and human rights abuse must be brought to justice through credible and independent mechanisms. Impunity only paves the way for further atrocities. Greece actively supports the European Union's diplomatic, humanitarian and accountability efforts in Sudan. At the national level, Greece is also providing humanitarian assistance through HCR, WHO and other UN agencies. The international community must act decisively and with urgency to ensure an immediate ceasefire and an inclusive political process, with full respect for Sudan's unity and territorial integrity. We have been warned of the risks. We must not fail the people of Sudan by allowing another mass atrocity. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Moldova.
Thank you, Mr. President. Moldova aligns with the EU statement. The Republic of Moldova is deeply concerned about the ongoing conflict in Sudan and the worsening situation in al-Obeid. Therefore, we supported the organization of this urgent debate as an exercise of the Human Rights Council preventive role. We condemn the escalating violence committed by the rapid support forces in and around al-Obeid. The continuation of ground offensive in al-Obeid creates imminent risk of mass atrocities, summer executions, abductions, arbitrary detention, sexual and gender-based violence against civilians. We call on RSF to immediately cease the attacks, including the drone strikes that endanger the lives of the civilians. All parties must respect international humanitarian law and human rights law and fully implement the Jeddah Declaration. We reiterate our call on the parties to reach an agreement on an immediate and lasting ceasefire in line with the Berlin Principles for Sudan and with full respect for Sudan's territorial integrity and sovereignty. We also urge all external actors to refrain from interference which further fuels the conflict. Accountability must be ensured and impunity must be prevented, and in this context we support the mandate of the fact-finding mission. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany.
Thank you, Mr. President. Germany aligns with the EU statement and that of the Coalition for Atrocity Prevention. We address this Council, like others, with deep concern for al-Obeid, where civilians face imminent threat from the RSF's ground offensive. We welcome that the Council comes together today to address this situation with the aim of preventing further violence. The High Commissioner's warnings of mass atrocities must be heeded. We cannot allow another El-Fasher. Germany urges the RSF to halt its assault and all parties to cease hostilities. Civilians must move safely and attacks on hospitals, water supplies and humanitarian aid must stop. Such acts violate international humanitarian law and may constitute war crimes. The responsibility to end this war lies with the SIF and RSF leadership, as well as those who arm or finance them. Nobody should ignore the obligations under international human rights and humanitarian law. We urge all external actors to cease support for this conflict immediately, as agreed upon in the Berlin Principles. At the Berlin Sudan Conference in April, the international community pledged nearly 1.5 billion euros to assist Sudan's people. Sudanese civilians also adopted a joint call, a powerful appeal for peace. Germany supports the Quad and Quintet to push for a ceasefire and a Sudanese-led political process. We will continue to support the fact-finding mission and the ICC, ensuring that justice prevails. Mr. President, the people of al-Obeid deserve urgent action. Germany calls on all influential states to act now. We reaffirm our commitment to Sudan's unity, territorial integrity and its people. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Thank you, Mr. President. We listened carefully to the briefers who provided a sobering account of the unfolding horrors in and around al-Obeid. The ongoing escalation is a stark reminder that there is no military solution to this conflict and that the only viable path forward is an immediate and unconditional ceasefire and an urgent humanitarian truce. The UAE unequivocally reiterates the strongest condemnation of all violations of international law committed by both warring parties across Sudan, including the targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure. In this vein, the UAE calls for an expansion of the existing UN arms embargo across the whole territory of Sudan as a necessary measure to halt hostilities and ensure the protection of civilians. And we must also guarantee safe and unhindered humanitarian access to all affected areas. As a member of the Sudan Quad, we welcome in particular the outcomes of the Berlin Conference and the space it provides for Sudanese civilians, as well as the Quintet's ongoing efforts to advance the civilian track. The international community's main objective must remain a comprehensive civilian-led political process independent from both warring parties and extremist groups that reflects the aspirations of the Sudanese people. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Australia is deeply alarmed by developments in al-Obeid and reports of an imminent offensive by the Rapid Support Forces that could lead to atrocities against besieged civilians. Inhabitants of al-Obeid are trapped and cut off from basic services, raising fears of a repeat of the horrors committed in El Fasher. We are gravely concerned by the reported repeated patterns of human rights abuses committed during this conflict. We call on the Rapid Support Forces to immediately cease its offensive on al-Obeid. Drone strikes on fuel stations and trucks have caused serious fuel and water shortages, deepening the humanitarian crisis. Australia urges all parties to de-escalate, protect civilians, facilitate full, safe, rapid and unimpeded humanitarian access, and ensure the protection of humanitarian personnel in accordance with international humanitarian law. We call on the Rapid Support Forces, the Sudanese Armed Forces and all parties to the conflict to agree to a permanent ceasefire and to respect human rights. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Rwanda.
Mr. President, Rwanda aligns with the statement delivered by Kenya on behalf of the Africa Group. We express our solidarity with the people of Sudan and remain concerned by the security and humanitarian situation in and around al-Obeid. We stress the importance of full respect for the protection of civilians, civilian infrastructure, and underline the need to facilitate humanitarian access and support efforts that contribute to de-escalation and accountability in a manner that advances peace and reconciliation. Rwanda reaffirms respect for Sudan's sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity, and stresses that there can be no sustainable military solution to the conflict. In this regard, Rwanda supports the ongoing efforts of the African Union and IGAD and coordinated regional and international engagement to accompany an inclusive Sudanese-led and Sudanese-owned political dialogue. In conclusion, we encourage all partners to align behind African-led efforts and avoid duplication in order to achieve the aspirations of the Sudanese people. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine.
Mr. President, Ukraine expresses profound concern over the rapidly deteriorating human rights and humanitarian situation in al-Obeid and in the wider Kordofan region. We are deeply alarmed that approximately 500,000 civilians remain at risk of large-scale atrocities and escalating military activities, intensified drone strikes and prolonged siege-like conditions that have deprived thousands of people of access to basic services. Ukraine strongly condemns all violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law, including deliberate attacks against civilian infrastructure and other actions that directly endanger the lives, safety and dignity of civilians. These violations have further deepened the humanitarian crisis, systematically eroded access to essential services and left already vulnerable populations in an increasingly precarious situation. We echo the warning of High Commissioner regarding the imminent risk of serious international crimes, including summary executions, arbitrary detention, abductions, sexual violence, and further forced displacement. The scale and pattern of reported violations demand urgent international attention and decisive actions. Ukraine calls to immediately de-escalate hostilities, ensure unhindered humanitarian access, and fully comply with obligations under international law. We stand in solidarity with the people of Sudan and reaffirm our support to the sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity of the Republic of Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. President. Portugal aligns with the EU statement. The people of Sudan continue to endure the catastrophic consequences of a conflict that inflicts immense suffering. Portugal is deeply alarmed by reports of a significant military build-up by the RSF in and around al-Obeid, alongside intensified drone strikes and artillery shelling raising the imminent risk of mass atrocities against civilians. We echo the High Commissioner's warning that urgent action is needed to prevent further military escalation and protect civilians. We call on all parties to cease hostilities immediately and to fully comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Civilians must be protected. Rapid, safe and unhindered humanitarian access must be ensured, and all allegations of violations and abuses must be thoroughly investigated so that those responsible are held accountable. No durable solution can be achieved through military means. A sustainable future for Sudan requires an inclusive, civilian-led political process with the meaningful participation of women, youth, civil society and the communities from all regions of the country. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Venezuela.
Gracias, señor presidente. La República Bolivariana de Venezuela expresa su solidaridad con el pueblo sudanés frente al conflicto en el Obeid, lamenta profundamente la pérdida de vidas humanas y la delicada situación humanitaria. Observamos con preocupación la intensificación del conflicto, con denuncias de injerencia externa y el respaldo a grupos armados que atentan contra la población civil y la infraestructura esencial. Reiteramos que toda iniciativa orientada a la paz debe respetar la soberanía, la integridad territorial y el derecho del pueblo sudanés a determinar libremente su futuro, de conformidad con el derecho internacional y el principio de no injerencia. Asimismo, destacamos que la cooperación y la asistencia técnica solo pueden contribuir de manera efectiva al mejoramiento de la situación de los derechos humanos cuando cuentan con el consentimiento del Estado concernido. En ese sentido, saludamos la disposición de Sudán para continuar cooperando con la Oficina del Alto Comisionado. Consideramos que solo a través del diálogo y la cooperación genuina se podrá construir una paz duradera en beneficio del pueblo sudanés y de sus derechos humanos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Sudan's unity, territorial integrity, sovereignty and independence are the basic tenets of our principled approach to the region and Africa. Most recent and continued attacks on al-Obeid by the RSF militia cause further escalation and aggravate the suffering of the Sudanese people. We are deeply alarmed by deteriorating humanitarian situation and violations of IHL. We join international community's call for an end to violence in and around al-Obeid. However, we believe a corrective is imperative on the part of us, the international community. We join others who underscore that there are no two equal sides to this. Every instance that the RSF and its affiliates are treated as equals with legitimate institutions, this ends up reinforcing the belief that they can continue their violence with impunity. While international initiatives are valuable in keeping Sudan high on the agenda, their ability to contribute to a lasting solution is proving limited in the absence of Sudan's legitimate representatives. Weakening and delegitimizing state institutions in the country without any viable alternatives end up delaying the potential for sustained peace and order. In these difficult times, Turkey will continue to provide humanitarian aid to ease the suffering of the Sudanese people. Turkish authorities and companies, therefore, continue to maintain their presence and activities in Sudan and support the Sudanese people and their legitimate representatives. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mali.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le Mali remercie le Conseil des droits de l'homme pour l'organisation de ce débat urgent et félicite ses initiateurs. Ma délégation relève que la situation des droits de l'homme à al-Obeid, capitale du Kordofan du Nord, est assez alarmante. Sous menace d'un siège de forces terroristes, la ville qui accueille des déplacés fuyant les violences dans les environs est confrontée à des conditions de vie extrêmement difficiles, avec des familles vivant dans des camps précaires, privées de services sociaux de base. En outre, le Mali est alarmé par des informations faisant état de l'intensification des attaques contre les infrastructures civiles essentielles par des forces terroristes, notamment les établissements de santé, les écoles, les sites accueillant des personnes déplacées, ainsi que les infrastructures électriques et hydrauliques indispensables à la survie de la population. Ma délégation exhorte le gouvernement soudanais à accélérer la mise en œuvre de l'initiative de paix présentée au Conseil de sécurité le 22 décembre 2025. Pour conclure, le Mali réaffirme son engagement constant à respecter la souveraineté, l'intégrité territoriale, l'indépendance et l'unité politique du Soudan et exprime sa solidarité au gouvernement et au peuple soudanais. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Chad. All right. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste.
Mr. President, Timor-Leste welcomes the convening of this urgent debate. We are deeply alarmed by the deteriorating human rights and humanitarian situation in and around al-Obeid, North Kordofan, as civilians continue to bear the devastating consequences of the ongoing conflict in Sudan. Report on this indiscriminate attacks, civilian casualties, destructions of civilian infrastructure, and impediments of humanitarian access are deeply concerning. Timor-Leste reiterates that all parties to the conflict must fully comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Civilians, including women, children, older persons, and persons with disability, must be protected, and humanitarian actors must be granted safe, rapid, and unhindered access to those in need. Timor-Leste remains concerned by the continued climate of impunity for serious violations and abuses. As a nation that has experienced conflict and has pursued reconciliations grounded in justice and respect for human dignity, Timor-Leste believes that a sustainable resolutions can only be achieved through inclusive dialogue, respect for international law, and the protections of the rights of all people. We call on all parties to cease hostilities, engage in good faith efforts toward peaceful resolutions, and place the welfare and dignity of the Sudanese people at the center of all actions. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Montenegro.
President, Montenegro aligns with the EU statement. Montenegro supports the urgent debate and the draft resolution, convinced that the prevention of mass atrocities is a shared responsibility. After over 18 months of siege-like conditions, developments in and around al-Obeid oblige this Council to act. The offensive by the Rapid Support Forces and their allies has placed hundreds of thousands of civilians at imminent risk of mass atrocities. The warning signs are clear, the risks are known, and the time to act is now, before al-Obeid becomes another al-Fashar. All parties in the conflict must comply with international humanitarian and human rights law. They must protect civilians, ensure humanitarian access, and respect humanitarian personnel. Failure to uphold these obligations cannot go unanswered. Preventing further atrocities and ensuring accountability are inseparable. Accountability is indispensable to justice, the prevention of further atrocities, and sustainable peace. Montenegro therefore reiterates its strong support for UNHRC and the fact-finding mission, whose work remains essential to advancing accountability, and calls on all conflict parties to cooperate fully with them. Mr. President, there is no military solution. The only path to sustainable peace is an immediate ceasefire and an inclusive civilian-led and Sudanese-owned political process in full respect of the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of Sudan. Our response must match both the urgency of the situation and the responsibility entrusted to us. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
Господин председатель, ситуация в Судане, к сожалению, далека от стабильной. Правительство страны и ее вооруженные силы продолжают противодействовать натиску деструктивных элементов, решивших бросить вызов не только стабильности и безопасности мирных жителей, но и легитимности действующего суданского руководства. Последние события вокруг аль-Обейда не должны оставлять никаких сомнений относительно истинных целей противников мира – распространить хаос на всю страну, создать предпосылки для ее расчленения. В целях недопущения развития ситуации по такому сценарию необходимо делать упор не только на устранение последствий длящегося уже 4-й год противостояния, но и его первопричин. Для этого от международного сообщества требуется осознание необходимости более конструктивного подхода к ситуации в Судане. Принципиально важно в полной мере учитывать позицию и пожелания правительства страны, являющуюся единственным гарантом сохранности суданских госинститутов и, собственно, суданской государственности. Рецепт для развязок острой стадии конфликта всем известен. Он заключается в налаживании честного и конструктивного взаимодействия с законными властями страны. Практика создания Советом соответствующих мониторинговых механизмов и регулярное расширение их полномочий явно этому не способствует. Призываем СПЧ отказаться, наконец, от политизации суданского сюжета и перейти к оказанию реального содействия правительству в нормализации ситуации в стране. Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Eritrea.
I thank you, Mr. President. At a time when the people of Sudan continue to endure severe humanitarian consequences of the crisis, the Council must move beyond routine discussions that do not translate into concrete outcomes. The continued escalation of the conflict is aggravated by the involvement of external actors whose actions have contributed to prolonging the violence and the killing of innocent people. Serious and concrete measures must be taken against those actors supporting the rapid support forces who have been committing serious crimes against civilians. Eritrea reiterates that a Sudanese-owned and inclusive political process remains the only viable pathway towards resolving the crisis. What is urgently needed is not another debate, but a genuine commitment for peace and stability, humanitarian relief, and an inclusive political process. The situation in Sudan requires a decisive action. The international community must prioritize ending this devastating conflict and deliver the needed assistance on the ground. Eritrea reaffirms its strong commitment to Sudan's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and unity, and rejects any attempts undermining these principles and creating parallel governing structures outside the government of Sudan. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Sudan.
Mr. President, South Sudan aligned with the African Group statement and thanks the High Commissioner for the update on the human rights situation in and around al-Obeid, North Kordofan, and welcome His Excellency Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sudan, Ambassador Meheddin Salim, and his accompanying delegation. We remain deeply concerned by the continued deterioration of the humanitarian and human rights situation in and around al-Obeid, North Kordofan. As a neighboring country, South Sudan has witnessed firsthand the devastating regional consequences of this crisis. We therefore reiterate our steadfast support for an immediate cessation of hostilities to pave the way to humanitarian relief and peaceful Sudanese-owned and Sudanese-led political process aimed at restoring peace, stability, and national unity. We reaffirm our position that existing mechanisms and continued engagement of the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights provide an appropriate framework for maintaining developments and supporting Sudan's national efforts, as establishment of any new human rights mechanism risks duplicating existing mandates and diverting resources. South Sudan remains committed to working with regional and international actors in a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect to support the people of Sudan in achieving lasting peace, protecting human rights, and addressing the root causes of the conflict. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Somalia.
Mr. President, Somalia aligns itself with the statement delivered by Kenya on behalf of the African Group. The Federal Republic of Somalia is deeply concerned by the grave humanitarian and human rights situation in and around al-Obeid. We strongly condemn all attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure, particularly those carried out by the RSS, continue to endanger innocent lives and undermine peace and stability. We call on the international community to scale up humanitarian assistance and recovery support for the people of Sudan in coordination with and under the leadership of the government of Sudan. The vulnerable populations, women, children, and the elderly pay the highest price in this conflict. Somalia reaffirms its unwavering support for the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of the Republic of the Sudan. We also reaffirm our support for the African Union roadmap and continued efforts by the African Union and IGAD with the support of the United Nations and relevant partners towards a Sudanese-owned political process. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to a distinguished representative of Zambia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Zambia is deeply concerned by the rapidly deteriorating situation in and around al-Obeid and the warnings of an imminent escalation that could place hundreds of thousands of civilians at grave risk. We call upon all parties to comply fully with international humanitarian law and international human rights law and to protect civilians without exception. How will we measure whether today's urgent debate has made a difference, Mr. President? Zambia believes our success should be measured not only by the statements delivered today, but by whether violence is de-escalated, humanitarian access expanded, and African mediation gains renewed momentum. We therefore reaffirm our support for peace efforts led by the AU and Intergovernmental Authority on Development with the support of the United Nations. We encourage all parties with influence over the parties to use that influence responsibly to support dialogue, implement existing commitments, and create the conditions for a sustainable cessation of hostilities. Ultimately, the credibility of preventive diplomacy will not be measured by the urgency of our deliberations, but by whether they help save lives, avert further atrocities, and restore hope to the people of Sudan. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to a distinguished representative of Nigeria.
Expresses deep concern over the deteriorating human rights and humanitarian situation in and around al-Obeid. We extend our sincere sympathy and solidarity to the government and people of Sudan. We are deeply concerned by the continued attacks affecting civilians and civilian infrastructure and the growing suffering caused by the ongoing conflict. Nigeria reiterates the need for full respect for international human rights law and international humanitarian law. We underscore the importance of protecting civilians and civilian infrastructure, ensuring safe and unhindered humanitarian access, and holding those responsible for violations and abuses accountable in accordance with international law. Nigeria reaffirms its unwavering support for the sovereignty, independence, unity, and the territorial integrity of Sudan. We remain convinced that a lasting solution can only be achieved through a Sudanese-owned and Sudanese-led political process supported by the African Union, IGAD, and the international community. Nigeria believes that international efforts should complement existing mechanisms and avoid creating mandates without the consent of the state concerned. Greater support should instead be directed towards strengthening existing mechanisms through technical assistance and capacity building to promote sustained peace and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovakia.
Mr. President, Slovakia aligns itself with the statement of the European Union. We are deeply alarmed by the rapidly worsening situation in al-Obeid, where civilians continue to bear the highest burden of the ongoing conflict. The international community have a responsibility to ensure that the tragic events witnessed in El Fasher are not repeated elsewhere. The protection of civilians remains an absolute priority. All parties to the conflict must respect their obligations under international humanitarian law and international human rights law. They must refrain from widespread attacks, ensure the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure, and facilitate rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access to all those in need. We are deeply concerned by the continued flow of arms and foreign fighters into Sudan in support of the RSF, which further fuels the conflict, aggravates civilian suffering, and undermines prospects for peace. We call on all external actors to refrain from any actions that contribute to further escalation and to fully respect their obligations under international law. Slovakia also reiterates that violations of international law must not go unpunished. Accountability is essential for justice and for preventing further future atrocities. We call on all parties to cease hostilities and engage in meaningful efforts towards a peaceful and sustainable resolution of the conflict. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, Sierra Leone thanks the Office of the High Commissioner for convening this urgent debate. As a member of the Coalition for Atrocity Prevention and Justice for Sudan, we align ourselves with this statement. We are gravely alarmed by the rapidly deteriorating situation in and around al-Obeid, a city of 500,000 people, including over 100,000 internally displaced persons. We take seriously the High Commissioner's warning that an offensive on al-Obeid risks further mass atrocities. We urge the rapid support forces to immediately cease their siege-like acts and call for safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access. After more than 3 years of atrocities, including the displacement of millions and widespread conflict-related sexual violence, we are not persuaded that existing mandates and mechanisms are sufficient. We therefore welcome this debate and the draft resolution. Sierra Leone's commitment to international humanitarian law is rooted in our recent history. It is for this reason that we support requesting the independent international fact-finding mission on Sudan to conduct an urgent inquiry into the grave violations detailed by the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner. Accountability remains essential. Sierra Leone stands in solidarity with the people of Sudan. We urge all states with influence to act now to help secure an immediate cessation of hostilities, protect civilians, and ensure respect for IHL and international human rights law. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. يعكس عقد هذا النقاش الطارئ خطورة الأوضاع في وحول مدينة الأبيض والحاجة الملحة إلى إعادة تسليط الضوء على معاناة المدنيين في السودان الشقيق منذ اندلاع النزاع. يعرب لبنان عن بالغ قلقه إزاء الأعمال العدائية في وحول مدينة الأبيض وما تنذر به من مزيد من التدهور في الأوضاع الإنسانية ومن خطر وشيك لارتكاب فظائع جماعية وفقا لما حذر منه مفوض السامي لحقوق الإنسان. يدين لبنان الانتهاكات الجسيمة لحقوق الإنسان والقانون الدولي الإنساني بما في ذلك القتل والتجويع وممارسة جميع أشكال العنف والتهجير القسري واستهداف العاملين في المجال الإنساني وتدمير البنى التحتية الأساسية والمنشآت الطبية. وينضم لبنان إلى النداءات المطالبة بوقف الأعمال العدائية وباتخاذ التدابير اللازمة لحماية المدنيين وضمان إيصال المساعدات الإنسانية بصورة آمنة ودون عوائق إلى جميع المحتاجين. ويؤكد لبنان أهمية المساءلة والمحاسبة عن الانتهاكات والجرائم المرتكبة لضمان عدم إفلات الجنات من العقاب وتحقيق العدالة للضحايا. كما ندعو إلى تكثيف الجهود الإقليمية والدولية للتوصل إلى حل سياسي شامل للنزاع الدائر في السودان ونؤكد ضرورة تعزيز حوار وطني جامع يقوده السودانيون يلبي تطلعات جميع مكونات الشعب السوداني ويضع الأسس لتحقيق السلام والمستدام. في الختام يجدد لبنان تمسكه بوحدة السودان سيادته وسلامة أراضيه وأمنه واستقراره وصون كرامة شعبه الشقيق. شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Oman.
سعادة الرئيس، تتابع سلطنة عمان باهتمام بالغ التطورات الإنسانية والأمنية في مدينة الأبيض وتعرب عن قلقها من التداعيات الإنسانية الخطيرة للصراع الدائر هناك على حياة المدنيين وسلامة المنشآت الحيوية. وتشدد سلطنة عمان في هذا السياق على ضرورة حماية المدنيين وتيسير وصول المساعدات الإنسانية دون عوائق وتأمين مسارات الخروج الآمنة بما يتوافق مع مبادئ القانون الدولي الإنساني وقرارات الأمم المتحدة ذات الصلة. كما تؤكد انطلاقا من مبادئها الثابتة الداعمة لإرساء السلم والاستقرار إلى أهمية تغليب لغة الحوار والحلول السلمية وتدعو جميع الأطراف إلى المشاركة بجدية في مسار سياسي شامل يفضي إلى تحقيق الأمن والاستقرار الدائمين حفاظا على المصالح العليا للشعب السوداني الشقيق. السيد الرئيس، تعرب سلطنة عمان مجددا عن تأييدها للجهود الإقليمية والدولية الرامية إلى إنهاء الصراع في السودان الشقيق وتدعو المجتمع الدولي إلى تكثيف المساعدات الإنسانية وتنسيق الجهود لضمان وصولها إلى المتضررين في ولاية شمال كردفان وغيرها من المناطق المتأثرة، على أمل أن تفضي هذه الجهود إلى تخفيف المعاناة وإلى تحقيق تطلعات الشعب السوداني وأن تحفظ للسودان الشقيق أمنه واستقراره ووحدة أراضيه. وشكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Argentina.
Gracias, señor presidente. Hay momentos en que la historia nos enfrenta y nos pregunta cómo pensamos escribirla, teniendo en cuenta nuestras propias acciones y conductas. Esa historia puede contener el catálogo completo de actitudes hostiles y violentas o estar plagada de intentos tercos y porfiados por alcanzar la paz. ¿Hasta cuándo, desde todos los rincones de la tierra, vamos a continuar siendo testigos silentes de rostros ensangrentados de niños sudaneses inocentes, de familias caminando por senderos sin destino y de cuerpos inertes desparramados en campos santos? ¿Quiénes ganan con esto y cuánto ganan con esto? El sufrido pueblo sudanés no soporta más vivir sin un gramo de futuro y sin siquiera un puñado de esperanza, y por eso debemos alzar la voz para instar a la paz y al fin inmediato de esta guerra donde la única victoria por el momento es el dolor colectivo y sin consuelo. Precisamente hoy este Consejo recoge el principio que África nos enseñó a todos nosotros. Allí nació el principio de no indiferencia, como el reconocimiento de que el sufrimiento de un pueblo nunca puede ser considerado un asunto ajeno y de que la soberanía encuentra su mayor fortaleza cuando se pone al servicio de la protección de la vida y de la dignidad humana. Desde Argentina, como un pueblo de paz, deseamos que recuperarla constituya el espíritu que inspire los párrafos más destacados de todos los futuros libros que escriban la historia de Sudán. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. تود دولة فلسطين أن تعرب عن تضامنها الكامل مع شعب السودان الشقيق في ظل ما يشهده من معاناة إنسانية متفاقمة نتيجة استمرار النزاع المسلح ولا سيما في مدينة الأبيض وما حولها بولاية شمال كردفان. وتتابع دولة فلسطين بقلق بالغ التقارير التي تشير إلى استمرار تدهور الأوضاع الإنسانية والأمنية ووقوع انتهاكات جسيمة للقانون الدولي الإنساني والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان بما في ذلك استهداف المدنيين والأعيان المدنية وعرقلة وصول المساعدات الإنسانية، الأمر الذي يفاقم معاناة السكان ويهدد حياتهم وكرامتهم. وتؤكد دولة فلسطين موقفها الثابت الداعي إلى الوقف الفوري والشامل للأعمال العدائية وضمان حماية المدنيين والامتثال لأحكام القانون الدولي وضمان وصول المساعدات الإنسانية بشكل آمن وسريع ومستدام إلى جميع المحتاجين وفقا لمبادئ الإنسانية والحياد وعدم التحيز والاستقلال في العمل الإنساني. كما تؤكد أهمية ضمان المساءلة عن جميع الانتهاكات ومكافحة الإفلات من العقاب وتدعو المجتمع الدولي إلى مضاعفة جهوده من أجل حماية المدنيين ودعم المساعي الرامية إلى التوصل إلى حل سلمي شامل يحفظ وحدة السودان وسيادته وسلامة أراضيه ويحقق تطلعات شعبه في الأمن والاستقرار والسلام. شكرا.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Holy See.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Holy See follows with grave concern the deteriorating situation in and around al-Obeid. This Council is aware of what happened in El Fasher. It is the responsibility of the international community to ensure that this tragedy is not repeated. International humanitarian law binds all parties without exceptions. The distinction between combatants and non-combatants and the protection owed to places of worship and hospitals, to the displaced persons and relief workers are not optional in war, they are its limits. My delegation is particularly concerned by the tightening obstruction of humanitarian access and the siege-like conditions in which food, water, and fuel are scarce, and essential city services are under attack. Starving civilians can never be a method of warfare. Moreover, al-Obeid is a vital lifeline through which relief reaches Darfur and much of Kordofan. Cutting it off would endanger far more than one city. Amid this suffering, the Catholic Church is present on the ground, caring for the displaced and providing food, water, sanitation, and health care. There is no military solution to this crisis in Sudan. My delegation reiterates the appeal of Pope Leo XIV to the warring parties to silence their weapons and begin without preconditions a sincere dialogue aimed at ending this fratricidal war as soon as possible. All parties must comply with international humanitarian law, protect and uphold human rights, step back from any assault upon al-Obeid, open safe corridors for those in need, and ensure unimpeded humanitarian access. The complete version of this statement will be available online. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Yemen.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. يتابع وفد بلادي بقلق بالغ التطورات الخطيرة في الوضع الإنساني في السودان الشقيق ولا سيما في مدينة الأبيض والمناطق المحيطة بها، وما يترتب على ذلك من تهديد مباشر لحياة المدنيين وتفاقم المعاناة الإنسانية. وتدين بلادي وبشدة الهجمات ضد المدنيين والأعيان المدنية والتدخلات الخارجية التي تسهم في تأجيج النزاعات المسلحة، بما في ذلك دعم أو تسليح أو تمكين أطراف غير حكومية خارجة عن القانون، كما ترفض أي محاولات لتقويض مؤسسات الدولة أو فرض واقع موازن خارج الأطر الشرعية والدستورية. وفي الوقت ذاته تدعم بلادي الجهود الإقليمية والدولية الرامية لإيجاد حل دائم يحفظ وحدة السودان الشقيق واستقراره وسيادته على كافة ترابه الوطني. وختاما، تأمل بلادي أن يفضي هذا النقاش إلى اعتماد مخرجات توافقية تحترم سيادة الدولة المعنية وتعزز التعاون معها وتتجنب إنشاء آليات دولية لا تستند إلى التوافق معها. وشكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Libya.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. تعبر بلادي عن القلق الشديد من الأنباء الواردة بشأن الحصار الذي تتعرض له مدينة الأبيض والتهديدات التي تواجه المدنيين الموجودين بها، ولا سيما أن مدينة الأبيض أصبحت مأوى لكثير من المدنيين الذين فروا من ويلات الحرب في دارفور. ندعو إلى وقف فوري لإطلاق النار ورفع الحصار عن مدينة الأبيض واحترام القانون الدولي الإنساني والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان. كما نعبر عن إدانتنا لأي انتهاكات تطال المدنيين والأعيان المدنية، ونشدد على ضرورة محاسبة المسؤولين عنها. السيد الرئيس، نجدد التأكيد على تضامننا الكامل مع الشعب السوداني الشقيق، كما تدعم بلادي المبادرات الدولية والإقليمية لإيجاد حل سلمي يحفظ السودان وحدته وسلامة أراضيه وتجنيب شعبه مزيدا من ويلات الحروب. وشكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. تضم تونس صوتها إلى البيان الذي ألقته كينيا باسم المجموعة الإفريقية، وتعرب تونس عن بالغ قلقها إزاء استمرار النزاع في جمهورية السودان الشقيقة وما تشهده مدينة الأبيض وما حولها بولاية شمال كردفان من تصعيد عسكري وتدهور للأوضاع الإنسانية، مستنكرة ما يرتكب من جرائم وانتهاكات ممنهجة واسعة النطاق في حق المدنيين. وتدعو تونس إلى الوقف الفوري لإطلاق النار لوضع حد لمعاناة الشعب السوداني الشقيق وتنفيذ اتفاق جدة لضمان حماية المدنيين والسماح بإيصال المساعدات الإنسانية بصورة آمنة وسريعة ودون عوائق طبقا لأحكام القانون الدولي الإنساني. وتجدد تونس التذكير بموقفها الثابت والداعم لوحدة جمهورية السودان الشقيقة واستقلالها وسيادتها وسلامة أراضيها ورفضها لأي تدخل في شؤونها الداخلية، فإنها تعتبر أن تغليب المصلحة الوطنية العليا وإيثار الحلول السلمية عبر استئناف حوار سوداني شامل قصد الوصول إلى تسوية سياسية مستدامة بملكية سودانية يبقى الخيار الأمثل لإنهاء الكارثة الإنسانية التي يعيشها الشعب السوداني. وترحب تونس في هذا الإطار بجهود الوساطة والمبادرات الإقليمية والدولية لحل الأزمة في السودان، وتؤكد على ضرورة مواصلة الجهود الدولية تحت رعاية الاتحاد الإفريقي وبالتعاون مع الإيجاد وبدعم من الأمم المتحدة وجامعة الدول العربية والشركاء الدوليين الرئيسيين، واستنادا إلى خريطة طريق الاتحاد الإفريقي لحل الأزمة السودانية. شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you. That was the last speaker on my list. We shall now turn to the list of speakers for national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. And I give the floor to the representative of Eliska Relief Foundation.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Eliska remercie le Conseil pour la tenue de ce débat d'urgence consacré à la situation alarmante à al-Obeid. Monsieur le Président, nous sommes au bord d'une catastrophe humanitaire qui pourrait être comparable aux atrocités commises par les forces de soutien rapide à El-Fasher en octobre 2015. Le renforcement militaire massif des FSR autour de la ville exposera quelques 500 000 civils au risque d'atrocités de masse dans un contexte de siège étouffant et d'attaques répétées contre les infrastructures et les services essentiels. Nous ne pourrons énumérer toutes les violations commises par les FSR soutenus par les Émirats arabes unis contre la ville ces derniers mois. Toutefois, il faut noter qu'entre janvier et juin 2026, 16 sites civils et des services à al-Obeid ont été pris pour cible, parmi lesquels des hôpitaux, des écoles, des centres électriques, des centrales électriques, des stations-service, un camp de personnes déplacées et des convois humanitaires. Ces attaques sont en violation du droit international humanitaire. Face à cette situation, Eliska appelle le Conseil des droits de l'homme à condamner fermement le renforcement militaire des FSR et à exiger la cessation immédiate des attaques contre les civils et les infrastructures civiles. Elle appelle également tous les États soutenant le FSR à cesser tout soutien qui alimente le conflit et à veiller à ce que les auteurs de ces actes répondent de leurs actes devant la justice. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of East and Horn of Africa Human Rights Defenders Project.
3 weeks ago, we urged the Council to bridge the gap between the gravity of the Sudan crisis and the attention the country gets. Those who were unaware of the scale and gravity of atrocity crimes before the FFM's al-Fasher report can no longer claim ignorance. As we speak, al-Obeid faces the risk of atrocities as a result of an RSF offensive. Mr. President, the call we issued is more than a call for a debate. It's a plea. The Council shouldn't react to one atrocity crisis after another, but move into a different phase of its action on Sudan, shaping consequences for perpetrators. Our immediate asks are simple. Request the FFM to conduct an inquiry and ensure that it has adequate resources to report. Beyond these, we urge bolder steps. 1. Clearly condemn external actors fueling atrocities in Sudan, including the UAE, without giving a free pass to SAF and their backers. 2. Encourage the FFM to work with other accountability mechanisms. 3. Recommend that the General Assembly submit all FFM reports to the Security Council. The criminal and political costs for those who contribute to Sudan's nightmare should be maximum. If it's not, we'll be condemned to doing more of the same, holding more urgent debates, convening more special sessions, responding to one atrocity crisis after another without attempting to break the cycle of impunity. It's an insanity trap.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Human Rights Research League for a video intervention.
Thank you, Mr. President. Human Rights Research League is deeply concerned by the escalating rapid support forces drone strikes on al-Obeid in preparation for a ground offensive that would put hundreds of thousands of civilians at grave risk. These ongoing strikes are killing civilians, destroying and blocking evacuation routes and cutting off access to food, water and fuel, thus preventing civilians to flee, leaving them trapped in a city with dwindling supplies and under an imminent threat of a full-scale armed attack. These advances mirror the playbook used in the attack on al-Fasher, where widespread attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure followed upon the encirclement of the city, leaving aid providers unable to meet even the most acute needs, and leading to mass displacement to areas even less prepared to cope with the humanitarian needs. These events must not be repeated, and we urge all parties to the conflict to uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law and human rights law to protect civilians. Furthermore, we request all states and others with a connection to the warring parties to exert all possible influence to avert a continuation and repetition of the atrocities committed by brokering an immediate cessation of hostilities. I thank you.
I now give the floor to the representative of Amnesty International for a joint statement.
Mr. President, this Council must call on the RSF and allied groups to stop their assault on al-Obeid. Commanders must not issue orders violating international law, and soldiers must not implement them. This Council must also urge the United Arab Emirates to stop its military support to the RSF. This week, Amnesty International issued a report detailing the RSF's atrocities against civilians during its attack on al-Fasher in 2025. Siege and engineered starvation, abuses targeting non-Arab communities through torture, killings, rape, and detention, including women and children. These actions in the RSF playbook, repeated in al-Fasher, constitute crimes against humanity of extermination, persecution on the basis of ethnicity and gender, and amount to ethnic cleansing. To protect civilians in Sudan and prevent further abuses and crimes, all states with leverage must individually and collectively push for an immediate nationwide ceasefire, support and deploy an international protection force, expand the arms embargo on Darfur to the rest of the country, and publicly condemn actors fueling the conflict, including the UAE. All states must also enforce the embargo so weapons manufactured in China, Russia, Turkey, the UAE, Canada, and France stop appearing on the battlefield. Surge humanitarian assistance and support and protect humanitarian actors, and support all existing accountability mechanisms for Sudan, including this Council's fact-finding mission. This must include more ambitious efforts to prepare case files and, where evidence and jurisdiction exists, to prosecute all those responsible for atrocities. People in and displaced from Sudan deserve no less.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Partners for Transparency.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. ترحب مؤسسة شركاء بهذا النقاش العاجل وتؤكد على أن ما تشهده مدينة الأبيض من حصار ممنهج وهجمات متكررة بطائرات مسيرة من قبل قوات الدعم السريع المدعومة من دولة الإمارات، والتي أسفرت في 11 يونيو عن مقتل 23 مدنيا وإصابة 19 آخرين، مما يمثل انتهاكا صارخا لمبادئ القانون الدولي الإنساني. لقد بلغ التجرد من القيم الإنسانية والقانونية مداه باستهداف تجمعات المدنيين أثناء تشييع الجثامين في مقابر دليل وقصف الأحياء السكنية الآهلة بالسكان. السيد الرئيس، لا يمكننا النظر إلى هذه الفظائع بمعزل عن تدمير البنية التحتية الحيوية، فقصف مركز كردفان لعلاج الأورام وإصابة 8 تلاميذ في مدرسة جيل الرائد في 27 يونيو يكشف عن استراتيجية الدعم السريع لتحويل الأبيض إلى مدينة غير قابلة للحياة ودفع نصف مليون شخص إلى النزوح القسري. ختاما السيد الرئيس، تحذر مؤسسة شركاء من أن الصمت والتراخي الدولي السائد اليوم يمكن أن يسمح بتكرار سيناريو الفاشل المأساوي في الأبيض. لذا تطالب المؤسسة هذا المجلس بالتحرك العاجل للوقف الفوري لجميع الهجمات ضد المدنيين في الأبيض وحظر نقل الأسلحة والعتاد العسكري لقوات الدعم السريع. شعب السودان يدفع اليوم الثمن وحمايته هي الاختبار الحقيقي لمصداقية هذا المجلس. شكرا.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Human Rights Watch.
Mr. President, we welcome the convening of this urgent debate and use of this Council's prevention mandate. We are hearing alarming reports from al-Obeid, eerily reminiscent of the weeks before the RSF takeover of al-Fasher. An unrelenting campaign of bombardment, including with drones, hampering free movement and hitting critical infrastructure. People are struggling to eat, drink, access electricity and other essential commodities. The RSF has a well-documented modus operandi, a track record of mass atrocities against civilians after military victories. This cannot be allowed to happen again. We need action to protect civilians, prevent atrocities, and meaningfully advance accountability. States should break their silence on growing evidence of UAE support to the RSF, directly urging them to end that support and use their leverage to prevent rather than enable further atrocities. While today we zoom in on al-Obeid, we cannot forget the wider context of widespread and systematic abuses by all parties to the conflict. Continued investigations by the FFM into grave abuses by all parties remain critical, including to support future accountability efforts. We need urgent and decisive action to prevent further atrocities in line with the FFM's clear recommendations. the deployment of a protection of civilians mission, the expansion of both the arms embargo and ICC jurisdiction to the whole of Sudan, and expanded sanctions targeting all those responsible for atrocities and other serious violations in Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Christian Solidarity Worldwide.
Thank you, Mr. President. The risk to civilians in al-Obeid cannot be underestimated. The time for action is now. Drone attacks on critical civilian infrastructure are worsening conditions for vulnerable civilians and hampering humanitarian operations in the city. Civilians have been targeted even while performing funeral rites for those who have been killed. There is also growing concern about hate speech on social media threatening civilian populations with death, looting and rape. Evidence of troop build-ups around the city, combined with the threats against civilians, points to imminent risk of atrocity crimes. In its February report, the UN fact-finding mission concluded that there were hallmarks of genocide in the actions of the RSF in the siege and fall of al-Fasher. We cannot stand by and watch similar atrocities unfold once again. To protect civilians in al-Obeid, the SAF and RSF must adhere urgently to international humanitarian and human rights law. Those who are supporting the warring parties, including the United Arab Emirates, must stop providing resources that are fueling these atrocities. It is imperative that the arms embargo in place for Darfur is both enforced and extended to the whole of Sudan, and that there is accountability for those who have breached these mechanisms. Robust support for the UN fact-finding mission is essential, ensuring it is fully mandated and resourced to identify all actors responsible for violations. There is also an urgent need for protection force to safeguard civilians, including those displaced multiple times who are now facing these horrors once again. Thank you.
I give the floor to the representative of International Bar Association for video intervention.
The IBA's Human Rights Institute is highly concerned about the serious risk of genocide in al-Obeid, North Kordofan, following the massacres in Darfur. Some 500,000 people are at risk of large-scale grave violations. If we are to learn anything from the atrocities in al-Fasher, it is not to ignore the warnings and red flags that are flashing before our eyes. The duty to prevent genocide, as explained by the ICJ in its 2007 judgment, is to be triggered at the instant a state learns, or should normally have learned, of the serious risk of genocide. From that moment onwards, states are to employ all means reasonably available to them to prevent genocide so far as possible. The serious risk of genocide in Sudan has existed since 2023 at least, yet states have been failing to take decisive actions and so failing to prevent the genocide. The bar calls on this Council to investigate the serious risk of genocide in Sudan and identify all means reasonably available to stop the atrocities. Take all possible actions to support the implementation of all recommendations contained in the reports of the fact-finding mission, and support accountability efforts to bring perpetrators to justice, including a UN Security Council referral of the situation in all of Sudan to the ICC. I thank you.
I give the floor to the representative of International Organization for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination.
Thank you. We are gravely concerned by the escalating violence and warnings that civilians, including large numbers of internally displaced persons, face the risk of large-scale atrocities amid intensifying hostilities. The situations around al-Obeid demands urgent international attention and action. Preventive action must not come after another catastrophe has already unfolded. EFOD, together with Geneva International Center for Justice, call on all parties to the conflict to immediately protect civilians, cease attacks against civilian populations, and fully comply with the obligations under international humanitarian and human rights law. We further call for an immediate de-escalation of hostilities in and around al-Obeid. 2, safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access to affected populations. 3, accountability for all violations and abuses, including through strengthened international monitoring and documentation efforts. Lastly but not least, we call on renewed diplomatic engagement aimed at protecting civilians and advancing a sustainable protection solution. The people of Sudan deserve protection, dignity, justice, and peace. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies for a video intervention.
السيد الرئيس، يعيش في مدينة الأبيض أكثر من نصف مليون شخص، بالإضافة إلى قرابة 100,000 نازح، وتشير بعض التقديرات الحديثة إلى أن العدد الفعلي أكبر من ذلك. وقد ظل أهل الأبيض يعيشون منذ 18 شهرا فيما يشبه الحصار. توصل التقارير الميدانية حشودا عسكرية كبيرة لقوات الدعم السريع، وهجمات يومية بالمسيرات، واستهدافا متعمدا لمحطة توليد الكهرباء ومستودعات الوقود وشبكات المياه، مما أسفر عن الشلل للمستشفيات وإمدادات المياه. إننا نحمل قوات الدعم السريع والأطراف الإقليمية الداعمة لها المسؤولية المباشرة عن هذه الهجمات وعن أي انتهاكات لاحقة قد تترتب على حصار المدينة أو اقتحامها. كما نذكر القوات المسلحة السودانية بالتزامها في الكف عن إدارة عملياتها انطلاقا من المناطق السكنية، والامتناع عن شن الغارات الجوية على الأحياء، وعدم التدرع بتهم التعاون مع قوات الدعم السريع لتبرير التعذيب والاعتقالات التعسفية. كما يتعين على الأطراف الامتثال المطلق باتفاقيات جنيف والبروتوكول الإضافي الثاني والوفاء بالتزاماتها الواردة في إعلان جدة. ونجدد دعواتنا لهذا المجلس لتحديد الأطراف الخارجية التي تمكن من ارتكاب هذه الفظائع ومحاسبتها، بما في ذلك الأطراف الإقليمية، وتفويض بعثة تقصي الحقائق بإجراء تحقيق عاجل. وندعو إلى التحرك الفوري لوقف عمليات التعبئة العسكرية وتوفير ممرات إنسانية آمنة ومستدامة، والأهم من ذلك وقف تدفق السلاح. شكرا لكم.
I now give the floor to the representative of International Federation for Human Rights Leagues.
FIDH and its Sudanese member organizations, SHRM and ACJPS, welcome the holding of this urgent debate on the situation in al-Obeid, as multiple sources warn of an imminent attack by the rapid support forces holding the city under siege. This council, convened in response to the genocide and mass atrocities committed by the RSF at El Fasher just over 6 months ago. We must ensure that this is not now repeated in al-Obeid or elsewhere. We therefore call on the Council and Member States to urgently take all measures at their disposal, beyond mere statements of concern, to prevent such atrocities and break the endless cycle of violence in Sudan. Such actions include publicly condemning the role of allied states and external actors fueling both sides of the conflict, including the UAE, among others. As a concrete step, the Security Council arms embargo must also be extended to cover the whole of Sudan. Accountability is in itself a preventative measure. The UN fact-finding mission and OHCHR, in coordination with civil society and other regional initiatives on Sudan, should be supported and resourced to document and investigate the situation in al-Obeid. Preservation of evidence is key so as to facilitate future accountability processes. As repeatedly called for by Sudanese civil society, the UN Security Council must expand the scope of the ICC investigation beyond Darfur to investigate atrocity crimes across all of Sudan, including al-Obeid. Third states should also be prepared to receive cases on the basis of universal jurisdiction. Such accountability measures, as well as all other efforts towards peace, prevention and protection, must be done with the meaningful participation of Sudanese civil society. Failing to act now risks further abandoning millions of Sudanese civilians. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of International Service for Human Rights.
أنا نونكشكوش أعمل بالمنظمة الدولية للإصلاح الجنائي ومرصد الجزيرة لحقوق الإنسان. هذا البيان مشترك. نرحب بانعقاد الجلسة العاجلة لمجلس حقوق الإنسان، ونطالب المجلس بتكثيف جهوده لحماية المدنيين وضمان وصول المساعدات الإنسانية ومواصلة رصد وتوثيق الانتهاكات لمنع وقوع المزيد من الفظائع، والضغط على أطراف النزاع لضمان احترام القانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان والقانون الدولي الإنساني. تشهد مدينة الأبيض منذ أسابيع تصعيدا خطيرا في العمليات العسكرية والاستهداف بالطائرات المسيرة، وقتل من خلالها أكثر من 50 شخص من بينهم نساء وأطفال. استهداف الأحياء السكنية والمرافق المدنية وتدهور حاد في الخدمات بما في ذلك الكهرباء والمياه والرعاية الصحية، مما فاقم معاناة ما يقارب 2,000,000 شخص نصفهم نازحين. يواجه المدنيين في مدن أخرى مثل الدلنج الهجوم من الطائرات المسيرة من قبل قوات الدعم السريع، مما أسفر عن قتلى من بينهم أطفال. نطالب المجلس أن يتخذ خطوات إضافية نحو المساءلة في السودان، لا سيما من خلال الإدانة الصريحة لجميع الجهات الخارجية التي تدعم الأطراف المتحاربة، والمطالبة باحترام قرار حظر الأسلحة الذي فرضه مجلس الأمن وإنفاذه وتعزيزه. نطالب جميع أطراف النزاع إلى الالتزام الكامل بأحكام القانون الدولي الإنساني وإقرار وقف عاجل لإطلاق النار والوقف الفوري لاستهداف المدنيين والأعيان المدنية وحماية المدنيين من ضمنهم النساء والأطفال، والوصول لهدنة إنسانية عاجلة لضمان وصول المساعدات الإنسانية دون عوائق وفتح ممرات إنسانية آمنة تتيح للمدنيين حرية الحركة. شكرا.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of World Organization Against Torture.
Monsieur le Président, le MCT et AOFI sont profondément alarmés par le risque imminent d'atrocités de masse à al-Obeid dans l'état de Kordofan du Nord. Il ne s'agit pas d'un risque théorique, mais bien d'un schéma déjà observé. À El Fasher, le siège, les bombardements et l'effondrement de la protection des civils ont été suivis d'atrocités que la mission internationale indépendante d'établissement des faits des Nations Unies a estimé présenter des risques d'un génocide. Aujourd'hui, cette même dynamique se reproduit à al-Obeid. Encerclement de la ville, attaque par des drones et des tirs, destruction d'infrastructures civiles et menace imminente d'une offensive terrestre. Près de 500 000 civils et plus de 100 000 personnes déplacées à l'intérieur du pays sont aujourd'hui en danger. Les attaques visant les infrastructures d'approvisionnement en eau, les réserves de carburant, les établissements de santé et les zones résidentielles ne constituent pas de simples dommages collatéraux. Elles sont susceptibles de constituer de graves violations du droit international humanitaire ainsi que des crimes internationaux. Le Conseil des droits de l'homme ne peut attendre qu'une nouvelle tragédie évitable soit documentée une fois qu'elle sera produite. Nous appelons le Conseil a demandé à la mission d'établissement des faits de mener une enquête urgente et à veiller à ce que les responsables, y compris les commandants, les acteurs extérieurs qui facilitent ces violations et les fournisseurs d'armes, soient identifiés et tenus de rendre des comptes. Nous appelons également tous les États membres disposant d'une influence à aller au-delà des déclarations en imposant des sanctions ciblées, en soutenant une action contraignante du Conseil de sécurité. Les preuves existent, les signaux d'alerte sont sans équivoque et ce qui est nécessaire aujourd'hui, c'est une action préventive. Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Mat for Peace, Development and Human Rights Association.
شكرا سيدي الرئيس. يقال أن التاريخ يعيد نفسه مرتين، الأولى كمأساة والثانية كمهزلة. لذلك فإن لم ندرس ما حدث بالأمس في الفاشر والجنينة ودارفور وغيرها من المدن السودانية التي سيطرت عليها ميليشيات الدعم السريع، فإننا لن نتعلم أي شيء في الغد، وسيكون مصير مدينة الأبيض مثل باقي المدن السودانية. سيد الرئيس، إن 500 ألف مدني يعيشون في مدينة الأبيض مهددين بالقتل والعنف والنزوح وانعدام الأمن الغذائي. لماذا؟ نتيجة ميليشيات الدعم السريع والتحركات العسكرية لها. ميليشيات الدعم السريع التي أنشأتها جماعة الإسلام السياسي سابقا والمدعومة الآن من دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة. إذا سيطرت هذه الميليشيات على المدينة فستكون الجرائم والانتهاكات أكثر بكثير ولا يمكن حصرها، ولنا في الفاشر عبرة وعظة. لذلك نطالب سيد الرئيس بالضغط على ميليشية الدعم السريع والدولة الداعمة لها لوقف الحشد العسكري على حدود مدينة الأبيض، كما تدعو مؤسسة ماعد كل الدول الأعضاء في المجلس والدول المراقبة للضغط للوصول إلى وقف إطلاق نار دائم ونهائي في السودان والعودة إلى بنود إعلان جدة كصيغة مقبولة وأساس لأي مفاوضات مستقبلية لوقف إطلاق النار. شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Plan International, Inc.
Plan International welcomes the convening of this urgent debate. We are deeply alarmed by the rapidly deteriorating situation in and around al-Obeid, where more than 500,000 civilians, including over 100,000 IDPs, face an imminent threat of large-scale hostilities. The warning signs are unmistakable. The international community cannot allow al-Obeid to become another El Fasher. Children will bear the heaviest burden of any escalation, where girls face some of its most devastating and lasting consequences. As fighting approaches densely populated neighborhoods and displacement sites, girls face heightened risk of conflict-related sexual violence, forced and early marriage, trafficking, exploitation, and the loss of education and essential services. We therefore call on all parties of the conflict to exercise maximum restraint and act now to prevent a repeat of the atrocities witnessed in al-Fashir by protecting civilians, especially girls and women, in accordance with international humanitarian law. Adopt zero tolerance for conflict-related sexual violence, ensuring that rape and other forms of sexual and physical violence are never used as weapons of war, and that all parties take effective measures to prevent and redress such crimes. Stop the traumatization of children by ending attacks on schools and populated areas, refraining from the use of explosive weapons with wide areas, effects, and ending the recruitment of and use of children. Guarantee safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access and safe passage for civilians wishing to flee, particularly as the rainy season threatens to turn displacement into an even greater humanitarian catastrophe. We also ask for the protection of aid workers delivering humanitarian assistance on the ground. Protect critical civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, schools, water, and electricity systems, and ensure uninterrupted access to food, nutrition, health, and protection services. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Rencontre Africaine pour la Défense des Droits de l'Homme.
Monsieur le Président, nos organisations remercient les États membres et la société civile qui ont soutenu ce débat urgent sur le Soudan afin de prévenir tout risque de génocide à al-Obeid 23 ans après le Darfour. L'escalade militaire marquée par l'usage de drones dans le corps d'enfants, ainsi que le siège de la région dans les affrontements entre l'armée soudanaise et les factions dissidentes du FSR, continue de provoquer un désastre humanitaire sans précédent. Tous les signes avant-coureurs d'un génocide silencieux sont réunis. Si nous n'agissons pas dès maintenant, le scénario d'El-Fasher pourrait se reproduire. Nos organisations dénoncent avec force l'instrumentalisation des acteurs politiques, de la société civile et de la diaspora soudanaise par des forces d'ingérence et de factions belligérantes. Nos organisations condamnent avec la plus grande fermeté les violations massives et graves des droits humains perpétrées par les FSR et par les forces armées soudanaises. Toutes les parties au conflit doivent se conformer à leurs obligations au titre du droit international humanitaire et du droit international des droits de l'homme. En conclusion, nos organisations soutiennent les efforts de médiation du quintet en vue de parvenir à une trêve humanitaire, suivie d'un cessez-le-feu permanent, afin d'instaurer un dialogue inclusif menant à une transition civile pour une paix durable. Enfin, nos organisations s'opposent à toute initiative unilatérale visant à la partition du Soudan. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thank you. This was the last speaker that we could accommodate in this meeting, and this brings us to the end of the urgent debate. Excellencies, distinguished representatives, colleagues, this brings us also to the end of our meeting. We will hold our next meeting in the afternoon at 3 p.m. to continue the interactive dialogue on the oral presentation by the High Commissioner of the findings of the OHCHR periodic report on the human rights situation in Ukraine and on the interim report by the Secretary General on the human rights situation in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, including the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, to be followed by the interactive dialogue on OHCHR report on enhancing the technical assistance provided to the government of South Sudan. Now, colleagues, I'm going to, before closing the meeting, to announce that there will be a statement by one of our colleagues, so please stay for a while. And let me close this meeting. And I hereby close the 29th meeting of the 62nd session of the Human Rights Council. Now, I understand that the delegation of Argentina has an announcement to make, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Argentina.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Muchas gracias a la Secretaría, a los técnicos y a los intérpretes por este espacio. Hay hombres cuya partida deja un vacío y hay hombres cuya partida nos deja una responsabilidad. Hoy despedimos a Gustavo Gallón, pero en realidad las palabras despedida o adiós parecen demasiado pequeñas para describir lo que sentimos, porque hay personas cuya vida no termina el día en que dejan este mundo. Continúan viviendo allí donde sembraron dignidad, donde enseñaron con el ejemplo y donde hicieron del servicio a los demás una forma de honrar la propia existencia. Gustavo era un jurista excepcional, un diplomático brillante, un defensor incansable de los derechos humanos. Su trayectoria habla por sí sola y ocupará con justicia un lugar en la historia de Colombia y en la historia de esta comunidad internacional. Pero quienes tuvimos el privilegio de conocerlo sabemos que esos méritos, siendo inmensos, no alcanzan para explicar quién era. Porque Gustavo poseía una virtud mucho más escasa, era profundamente humano. En un mundo donde tantas veces se levanta la voz para imponerse, él hablaba para comprender. En un tiempo en que las diferencias parecen empujarnos a levantar muros, él construía puentes. En un ambiente donde la urgencia suele desplazar a la reflexión, Gustavo encontraba siempre el tiempo para escuchar, para preguntar, para interesarse sinceramente por la vida del otro. Nunca buscó ser el centro de una conversación. Sin embargo, cuando hablaba, todos escuchábamos. No porque levantara la voz, sino porque la autoridad moral no necesita hacerlo. La serenidad era una de sus mayores fortalezas. Jamás confundió la firmeza con la dureza. Nunca creyó que la cortesía debilitara las convicciones. Al contrario, comprendía que el respeto es la forma más elevada de defender un principio. Y quizás sea esa una de las enseñanzas más importantes que nos deja. Los derechos humanos no son solamente tratados, resoluciones o discursos. Son, antes que nada, la manera en que tratamos a quien tenemos delante. Gustavo lo sabía y por eso defendía los grandes principios con la misma naturalidad con la que ejercía las pequeñas bondades de todos los días. Quienes compartimos con él los pasillos de este Palacio de Naciones, recordaremos muchas reuniones, innumerables negociaciones y largas jornadas de trabajo. Pero sospecho que con el paso del tiempo no serán esos los recuerdos que más permanecerán. Permanecerá su sonrisa serena, su saludo cordial, la conversación generosa al terminar una sesión difícil, el interés sincero por los demás, porque al final eso es lo que verdaderamente sobrevive de una persona. No los títulos, no los cargos, no los reconocimientos, sino el bien que fue capaz de sembrar silenciosamente en la vida de otros. Hoy sentimos una tristeza inmensa porque no ha partido solamente el embajador de Colombia, ha partido un amigo. Ha partido un colega cuya sola presencia hacía de este lugar un espacio más humano. Y quienes permanecemos aquí comprendemos, quizá con más claridad que nunca, la fragilidad de nuestras propias vidas. Pasamos nuestros días redactando informes, negociando textos, pronunciando discursos, convencidos de que siempre habrá una próxima reunión, un próximo viaje, una próxima conversación. Hasta que un día descubrimos que algunas conversaciones ya no podrán tener lugar, que algunas manos ya no podremos estrechar. Y entonces comprendemos que el tiempo compartido era en realidad el mayor de los privilegios. En la diplomacia existe una antigua costumbre. Cuando una misión concluye, el último mensaje de una embajada transmite a su Cancillería suele llevar un título sencillo y definitivo: fin de misión. Hoy nos corresponde a nosotros escribir ese cable por Gustavo. Es quizás el mensaje más difícil que cualquiera de nosotros hubiera querido redactar. Pero mientras imaginamos esas palabras, comprendemos que no describen toda la verdad, porque la misión de Gustavo entre nosotros ha terminado, pero no su misión. Quisiera creer, y permítame hoy esa licencia que solo concede el afecto, que a alguien le han encomendado una nueva misión, que ha recibido un nuevo destino, un destino donde no existen fronteras, no hay usos horarios ni credenciales diplomáticas. Un lugar desde el cual seguirá inspirando la defensa de los derechos humanos allí donde esa causa necesite una conciencia limpia, una palabra justa y un coraje sereno. Allí donde haya una persona cuya dignidad deba ser protegida, así allí donde haya una injusticia por desafiar. Allí donde haya una voz que deba levantarse sin odio, pero sin miedo. Ese fue Gustavo y así queremos imaginarlo, no como alguien que nos ha dejado, sino como alguien que simplemente ha partido antes hacia la próxima misión. Mientras tanto, aquí, en esta casa que compartimos, nos queda una tarea: continuar el camino, conservar intacta la decencia que él practicó, ejercer nuestra profesión con la misma humildad, con la misma integridad y con la misma compasión que lo distinguieron. Porque el homenaje más grande que podemos rendirle no consiste en pronunciar hoy las palabras más bellas, consiste en que dentro de muchos años alguien pueda decir de nosotros una pequeña parte de lo que hoy decimos de él. Ese será el verdadero triunfo de su vida. Ese será el legado más noble que pudo dejarnos. Gracias, querido Gustavo. Tu misión entre nosotros ha concluido. La nuestra, inspirada en tu ejemplo, acaba de comenzar. Muchas gracias, señor presidente, por este espacio.
Thank you, Ambassador. I myself fully share the sentiments you have conveyed, and I'm sure many, if not all, in this room also have the same sentiments as the applause had emphasized. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.
You just turn it on and